Lord of Mystery, The Undead Don't Die from Passing Fire by author Ni Di Xun Zong. Chapter 101-110. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And those who want to support me, I have a Patreon channel, get early access to video on Patreon. Chapter 101. When in doubt, ask the fool. Not good. Alger's expression changed slightly. Although the battle just now ended extremely quickly, it inevitably caused quite a stir. Especially the screams of the blue shadow falcon and the dragon-eye sea eagle, which carried far away. It was also within Alger's expectations that these movements would attract some extraordinary creatures. But the problem was, the number was simply too exaggerated. This wasn't just one or two, but dozens. It seemed all the nearby extraordinary creatures had been attracted over. Moreover, he knew most of these extraordinary creatures before him, the weakest were equivalent to sequence 7 extraordinary individuals. He might not even be able to defeat one in a one-on-one fight, let alone so many. Cold sweat seeped from Alger's forehead, and he instinctively took a step back. But the next moment, Ember's calm voice came from beside him. "Don't move, they can't see you." Alger stopped in his tracks and looked down at his right hand, where he was wearing 2 rings on his fingers. The Phantom Limb Ring and the Sleeping Dragon Crest Ring. They could hide one's figure from 5 meters away. Which means, Alger looked up again at the menacing extraordinary creatures in front of him. Once he calmed down, he indeed noticed more details. For example, although these extraordinary creatures were menacing, their gaze wasn't on the 2 of them. Instead, they were looking at the corpses of the blue shadow falcon and the dragon-eye sea eagle beside them. Run into the sea. Alger took a deep breath and quickly said, "The Azure Avenger is nearby, we'll be completely safe as long as we get on the ship." At this moment, he realized again how useful these 2 rings were. As long as they maintained a distance of 5 meters, these extraordinary creatures would never discover them. Even if surrounded, they could completely leave at their leisure. However, Ember seemed to be lost in thought, completely ignoring Alger's words. He was thinking about how to ensure these extraordinary creatures could survive intact. After all, they were all worth money. And it was precisely during this time the extraordinary creatures finally couldn't suppress their restless bloodlust and charged towards their direction. Alger's body instantly tensed up. Gritting his teeth, he rushed towards Ember, preparing to pull him towards the sea. He didn't know what Ember was thinking, but the current situation was clearly not the time for thinking. However, just as Alger was about to act, Ember slowly took out the crystallization staff. Under Alger's gaze, his raised staff condensed an azure light. Ding! Ding ding! After a brief casting, accompanied by crisp sounds like striking crystal, the azure light turned into a sky full of arrows, shooting towards the surging extraordinary creatures ahead. These extraordinary creatures, who couldn't even see where they were, naturally had nowhere to dodge and were hit by the sudden rain of arrows almost instantly. But surprisingly, the azure arrows disappeared the moment they pierced their bodies. They didn't even leave the slightest scar on their skin, as if no effect had been caused. But at the same time, the pupils of these extraordinary creatures, whose bodies were completely unharmed, instantly became unfocused. Open black lens bracket Farron arrow rain close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. One of the advanced spells of Farron darts can continuously shoot soul darts. This was personally researched by the crystallization elder. After entrusting it to the high priest, it was named after his daughter. Hazel. Close black lens bracket. Bang. The massive bodies of the extraordinary creatures, as if losing all support in an instant, fell one after another with a crash, splashing up a large amount of mud and sand. These creatures, which were incredibly powerful in the past, were unable to get up again at this moment. What kind of ability is that? Alger felt his soul trembling, his heart filled with disbelief. This wasn't just 1 or 2 extraordinary creatures. It was all of them. All the extraordinary creatures hit by that rain of arrows, no matter what they were doing before, all stumbled forward and fell onto the beach without exception at this moment. Alger had no doubt that they were dead. Even though there wasn't the slightest wound on their bodies, their lifeless pupils had already explained everything. Although he had never encountered a similar ability. But Alger was very certain that it was an attack that struck directly at the soul. What was shattered by the rain of arrows for these dead extraordinary creatures wasn't their physical bodies, but their souls. Was this caused by that staff? Or is it Ash's own ability? Alger. Ember put away the staff and suddenly said, "Bring the ship over." Okay. Alger took a deep breath and replied. He quickly left the beach, but returned here 10 minutes later. This time, he arrived from the sea, piloting the Azure Avenger. Bang! Clang! The Silver Knights leapt down from the deck, dragging the corpses of the extraordinary creatures amidst the clanging of their armor. On the other side, Alger had stabilized the ship, furled the sails, and dropped anchor. At the same time, he lowered the gangplank extending to the sea to improve the Silver Knight's moving efficiency. Do you want to continue exploring? Alger glanced at Ember, who had boarded the deck, and asked casually, there's still plenty of time, we can wait until evening to leave. Do you want to hunt some more extraordinary creatures? Ember raised an eyebrow slightly and asked. Alger shook his head decisively. He had already obtained the 2 main materials he wanted, and now there were dozens of extraordinary creature corpses, so he wasn't interested in other extraordinary creatures. Then let's leave as soon as possible. Ember looked out at the distant sea horizon and said casually. For him, exploring the island was just a side quest. But he now held the soul of a demigod, and could advance the main plot just by returning to Backland as quickly as possible. Why waste time exploring side quests himself? What's more, he already knew the island's coordinates anyway, and could come back anytime in the future. The island couldn't possibly grow legs and run away, could it? In that case, we'll leave in a bit. Alger nodded, seemingly regretfully, but in reality, he let out a heavy sigh of relief in his heart. He actually didn't want Ember to continue exploring this island, because he knew there was a bigger secret deep within this island. This island was discovered by him and Keelingos together. But when they came last time, he could only wander around the periphery because his strength was too weak, while Keelingos had the opportunity to go deep into the island's interior. It was even possible that the magical item, Creeping Hunger, which Keelingos relied on for his fame, was obtained through the secrets on this island. It was precisely because of this reason that the gap between him and Keelingos grew wider and wider. Last time he missed the opportunity because his strength was too weak and he could only watch the chance slip away from his grasp. In any case, he didn't want to experience this feeling a second time. If Ember insisted on exploring, he wouldn't be able to stop him. But since Ember didn't want to continue exploring, he wouldn't keep urging Ember to explore. Oh, right. After hesitating for a moment, Alger suddenly said, among the corpses of those extraordinary creatures, there's a mirror dragon, but Miss Justice's commission is still missing a fruit from an elder tree. I know there's an elder tree nearby, and we still have plenty of time, so how about we go get a fruit for Miss Justice before leaving? All right. Only then did Ember remember something about Audrey, and nodded, saying, do you want me to go with you? No need. Alger shook his head, the elder tree is nearby, and there's no danger, after all. Even if there was danger originally, it's gone now. Alger looked down at the bodies of the extraordinary creatures on the beach, whose eyes were still open in death, and thought to himself. Walking off the deck, Alger quickly passed the Silver Knights and the piles of extraordinary creatures on the beach, and ran towards the forest ahead. Unlike ordinary forests, the trees here were thick and tall, with dense branches and leaves. Even the thinnest one was at least 2 people's arm spans in thickness. And the bark of these trees all showed obvious scale-like patterns, densely pieced together piece by piece, as if they could come alive at any moment, as if their surfaces could writhe at any moment. But Alger knew very well that these trees actually weren't dangerous. After all, he had been here more than once. As he walked along, Alger's mood also became increasingly relaxed, because he hadn't found any traces of anyone passing by along the way. The reason he came to find the elder tree was also to confirm this point. Following the path he was familiar with, he finally found a large tree that was over 10 meters thick. Even in this forest, its size was definitely one of the largest. And the most striking thing was the anthropomorphic old man's face on its trunk. This was also the reason why it was called the elder tree. As a plant-type extraordinary creature, its threat wasn't as great as other extraordinary creatures. After all, plants don't grow legs. This also led to Alger obtaining a fruit from it with almost no effort. And throughout the entire process, the elder tree was like a true elder, the face on its trunk maintaining a benevolent expression without any reaction. Phew. Alger breathed a sigh of relief, raised his right hand, and saw the 2 rings on his fingers. Being able to get the fruit so easily, these 2 rings also played a significant role. However, after obtaining the elder tree fruit, Alger didn't rush to leave. Instead, he looked towards the back of the elder tree. That was the deep part of the island, the most core area of this primitive island. He stood there and looked for a long time, but ultimately turned around and left silently. His strength wasn't enough to go to that area yet. He would need at least sequence 5 strength to explore it deeply. Taking a deep breath, Alger returned along the original path. Only, he didn't notice. Under the cover of the forest shadows, a figure was silently watching him. Seeing Alger leave, that figure also moved in sync. When Alger returned to the beach, he happened to see a silver knight carrying the corpse of the last remaining blue shadow falcon onto the ship. And opposite the empty beach was the Azure Avenger's deck, piled high. Even the Azure Avenger's waterline had risen significantly. And Ember was still standing on the deck. Is he really not interested at all? Alger hesitated slightly, unable to help but think to himself. I got the elder tree fruit. Returning to the deck calmly, Alger conveniently took off the 2 rings from his right hand and returned them to Ember. Although he felt a bit reluctant, he knew these rings didn't belong to him in the end. How are you planning to handle these corpses? After Ember took the rings, Alger asked casually. Sell them. Ember thought for 2 seconds, then mused, how much do you think they can sell for? Alger looked at the corpses of the extraordinary creatures on the deck and briefly analyzed. The market price for Sequence 7 extraordinary materials is usually around 500 to 700 gold pounds, while the market price for Sequence 6 extraordinary materials is around 1200. If they are all sold, just these extraordinary materials alone are worth at least 50,000 gold pounds. Besides that, even without counting the extraordinary materials, the physical bodies of these extraordinary creatures are also very valuable. For example, Alger paused, then continued, the mirror dragon's eyes that Miss Justice wants are relatively rare extraordinary materials, but the market price doesn't exceed 1,000 pounds. As for the mirror dragon blood she needs, the price is around 100 pounds per 50 milliliters. The price of the former is 10 times that of the latter, but a mirror dragon only has 2 eyes, while it has a lot of blood. However, during normal hunts, the mirror dragon will bleed heavily, and in the end, only a few hundred milliliters can actually be collected. Of course, for you, there's no such issue. As Alger spoke, he looked at the huge, dragon corpse, his eye corner twitching slightly. A mirror dragon is called a dragon, but it's actually just a giant lizard. The blood in its body isn't measured in milliliters, but in liters. If it could all be sold, it would definitely be worth much more than a pair of eyes. But first of all, when ordinary people hunt extraordinary creatures, which one doesn't end up with blood and flesh splattering everywhere? By the time they kill the mirror dragon to get its eyes, most of the blood in its body would have already flowed out, and only a few hundred milliliters could be collected in the end. After all, not everyone can instantly kill these extraordinary creatures without shedding blood like Ember. Each corpse was preserved extremely well. Secondly, the market demand for mirror dragon blood isn't actually that high. They had a lot of blood, but they might not be able to sell much of it. Thirdly, preserving the blood of extraordinary creatures is extremely difficult, and it varies greatly. If one doesn't have a special understanding of the characteristics of these creatures, even if they get it, it might be wasted for nothing. Of course, currently, this blood is still inside the extraordinary creatures' bodies, so there's no need to consider preservation issues for now. But the problem is, I have to remind you, these things are not easy to preserve. Alger told Ember his concerns, reminding him, the extraordinary materials condensed after an extraordinary creature dies will hardly rot, but their physical bodies don't have this treatment. My suggestion is to dig out the extraordinary materials first. Then take a portion of the most valuable parts from the corpses and preserve them, leaving the rest to fate. If they can last until they are sold, that's naturally best. If they rot, they can only be wasted for nothing. How about sacrificing them? Ember suddenly asked. Huh? Alger was slightly stunned. Sacrifice all these things to the fool. Ember said casually, for the fool, preserving these extraordinary creatures shouldn't be difficult. Although his soul space could also store things, and the space was almost infinite. But the soul space can only store materials. For example, extraordinary characteristics and extraordinary materials are considered materials, but complete corpses are not included. Otherwise, he would have to carry some people's corpses with him. One reason is for remembrance, and the second. Good idea. Alger's eyes lit up, and he immediately said, I'll pray to Mr. Fool right away. Sacrifice the things to Mr. Fool and entrust them to him for safekeeping. And have Mr. Fool bestow them when needed. For them now, this was the best solution. Bar none. The only difficulty was, Alger couldn't be sure if Mr. Fool would agree to them doing this. Chapter 102, The Sun God Divided into 5. The Fool not belonging to this era. You are the mysterious ruler above the gray mist. You are the king of yellow and black who holds good fortune. In the captain's cabin of the Azure Avenger, Alger prayed to the fool with some unease. He briefly explained the situation. Because there were slightly too many extraordinary creatures hunted, they found it difficult to preserve them in time. Therefore, he hoped to sacrifice them to Mr. Fool, asking him to preserve them on their behalf. At the same time, Klein, who was freeloading a meal at Lawyer Jurgen's house, felt something and apologized to Mrs. Doris. He then got up and entered the washroom, his soul ascending to the fool. And when he received the prayer from Mr. Hanged Man, Mr. Fool was first taken aback. There's this kind of operation. Klein's expression was a bit strange. Storing items above the gray fog, he was familiar with that. But having others things for him to preserve, this was the first time. However, since there was no loss anyway, he wouldn't refuse. After thinking for a moment, Klein resumed his fool persona and replied to the Hanged Man in a calm and gentle tone. I understand. Who? Alger opened his eyes, a long breath escaping his heart after receiving the clear reply. The fool didn't object but replied with, I understand. This showed that Mr. Fool didn't care about such trivial matters at all. After all, Mr. Fool was a genuine god, naturally looking down on these mid-sequence extraordinary creatures. However, if they weren't members of the Tarot Club, Mr. Fool probably wouldn't be so lenient, right? Alger thought to himself, suddenly feeling a bit fortunate that he had joined the Tarot Club. Mr. Fool has agreed to our request. Alger adjusted his mindset, walked out of the captain's cabin, and said to Ember, who was standing by the ship's side. Then let's sacrifice them as soon as possible. Ember suddenly turned and walked towards the cabin, saying without looking back. Okay. Alger nodded, not feeling any suspicion. On the other side, Ember, who had returned to the cabin, stood still and extended his palm. A puddle of silver liquid slid off his body, eventually condensing into shape in his palm. So, Ember whispered softly, what did you see? Having learned from the experience of exploring the painting world, Ember did not personally go to explore this island. What went in his place was the mimic tear in his hand. The mimic tear seemed to sense something, extending two long tentacles towards the sides of Ember's head. In an instant, memories surged in his mind like a movie. From the mimic tear quietly getting off the ship, to passing through the jungle and entering a ruined relic. Until the very end, the scene froze on a huge painting. The painting had a dark tone, with vague figures casting shadows in the background, and the main subject was a long table. On the long table lay a figure bearing a luminous cross on his back, surrounded by three people shrouded in shadows. One was handsome and energetic, one was majestic and unrestrained, and one had a white beard, appearing very wise, yet all three pairs of eyes revealed an unspeakable sense of evil, and their actions were the same. Opposite them, a sinister, dark infant sat cross-legged. This scene looked a bit strange, and in reality, it was indeed a bit strange. But Ember's gaze went directly past them, looking at the most inconspicuous figure in the corner. That was a young girl with long white hair. She sat on a high stool taller than herself, her crystal clear, tender feet gently swinging in the air. And in front of her was a huge, unfinished oil painting. And beside the young girl, was a nun holding a large scythe, guarding her side. Although her figure was shrouded in a nun's robe, one could still faintly discern the nun's slender and graceful figure. Only at this moment, the nun's actions were completely different from her attire. She held a piece of red headscarf in her hand, the other end connected to the figure being devoured by the other four. And the red headscarf seemed to have a life of its own, greedily drawing blood from the figure's body. Miss Freed. Ember opened his eyes, his expression slightly surprised. Because he recognized the true identities of those two figures. And saw what they were doing. Miss was painting, and Freed was collecting the blood of the figure bearing the luminous cross as pigment. As for the other four figures devouring the corpse, Ember couldn't recognize them. But presumably, they were natives of this world. And the one being devoured was, without a doubt, a god. The only question was, who killed him? The painting only showed the scene of dismemberment, and it seemed as if the people in the painting had jointly killed him. Not just the few who were devouring, but even the figures serving as the background seemed to have participated. But things didn't seem that simple either. For example, Ember recalled that painting, although there were only a few people on the surface. Among the blurry figures serving as the background, one figure was clearer than the others. Although her entire body was shrouded under a black robe, revealing only her back, the mimic tear couldn't see her face clearly. But based on the graceful back left by that figure, one could vaguely discern that it was a woman. Moreover, for some reason, her black robe gave Ember a sense of inexplicable familiarity, as if he had seen it somewhere before. But his memory was clearly somewhat blurry, and he couldn't recall it no matter how hard he tried. Ember decisively discarded the jumbled thoughts in his mind. If he couldn't remember, he wouldn't think about it. He would recall it sooner or later anyway. Ember's mood instantly brightened significantly, no longer thinking or having worries. He turned and walked towards the deck, thinking of checking on Alger's progress. Meanwhile, Alger had already set up the sacrificial ritual and was devoutly chanting in ancient Hermes language. The fool not belonging to this era. You are the mysterious ruler above the gray mist. You are the king of yellow and black who holds good fortune. Your loyal servant implores your gaze. Implores you to accept his offering. Implores you to open the door of your kingdom. The ancient incantation echoed within the wall of spirituality, stirring up swirling gales and bringing forth the oscillation of natural forces. Alger skillfully took out a small dark brown glass bottle from his pocket, unscrewed the cap, and poured out many granules resembling sesame seeds. These granules shimmered with metallic luster, possessing an unspeakable beauty. Then, he scattered these granules out, scattering them into the wind. Whoosh! The gale became increasingly turbulent but was no longer fierce, taking on silver white and deep black colors respectively. As they constantly collided and merged, these two winds of different colors entered the candlelight, symbolizing the Fool, expanding and tearing open a normal-sized illusory door. Although it wasn't the first time, Alger still couldn't control himself from starting to tremble. That was deep fear, that was inexplicable excitement. And the silver knights beside him were already prepared for battle, after the illusory door opened. They began throwing the extraordinary creatures piled on the deck into the illusory door. And that illusory great door seemed not large, as if the corpse of any extraordinary creature could block it. But in reality, whenever those huge corpses tried to block the illusory great door, they would be instantly enveloped and absorbed until they completely disappeared inside the door. The Silver Knight's efficiency was extremely high. In just a few minutes, the corpses that had been piled up like mountains were already cleared away. Alger felt a sense of relief. At least he no longer had to worry about how to preserve these corpses. "Thank you for your generosity, Mr. Fool." Alger bowed his head and said respectfully. Mr. Fool did not respond to him as before, but only cut off the connection after a moment of silence. Alger looked up ahead and saw the illusory great door disappear, the gale stopped, and the candlelight returned to its original state. Everything seemed as if it had never happened. In the magnificent palace above the gray fog, Klein looked at the mountain of corpses piled up in front of him with a slightly numb expression, the corner of his eye twitching slightly. Although Alger had informed him in advance that there were some things he hoped could be stored with him. But this quantity was a bit too exaggerated. You probably wiped out the layers of these extraordinary creatures, didn't you? And, so many extraordinary creatures, how much money would this sell for? Even if you gave me a tenth of it, I could pay off the debt I owe Ember, and even have some left over. Klein's eyes suddenly turned red, and his heart felt incredibly sour. He originally thought agreeing to the other party was a trivial matter. But now, seeing these things, he felt like a clown. Working himself to death, facing life and death dangers, yet earning less than a fraction of Ember's earnings. After all, these extraordinary creatures were simply living pounds sterling in his eyes. Even if they were dead, they were heavy pounds sterling. Even if the most valuable extraordinary characteristics had already been dug out in advance, the remaining parts were still worth at least 100,000 pounds sterling. Although with such a large amount of material, even if he secretly took a little blood or something, it probably wouldn't be discovered. But that was Ember's stuff after all. Although I, Klein, am poor, I must be poor with integrity. But, I really feel like a clown right now. Klein's expression was on the verge of tears. Why did he agree to Alger's request? Facing a mountain of gold all day, it was difficult for him too, all right. Suddenly, Klein felt that his potion must have been partially digested. Because he really felt like a clown right now. Then this is also a good thing. Klein took a deep breath, forcibly calming his restless emotions. Although this mountain of gold could be seen but not eaten, being able to digest the potion was a good thing. That's right. That's how it is. That's the matter. He, Klein, made a huge profit today. However, Klein recalled his recent encounters, and the corner of his eye suddenly twitched. To be honest, he really wanted to borrow another sacrifice ring from Ember, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. After all, the debt he owed last time still hadn't been paid off. But if he didn't borrow it, he couldn't help but feel a little panicked. Although he had already entrusted Miss Justice to hire someone to assassinate the envoy, this would take some time after all. And before the envoy was assassinated, he would very likely come looking for trouble first. If it was just the sacrifice ring alone, it wasn't entirely safe. After all, the other party might guard his corpse and kill him again. Therefore, the safest method was still to find a bodyguard for himself. At least a sequence 6 or even sequence 5 bodyguard. It's just that, for the time being, it hadn't reached such a critical point. After all, the envoy's main goal now was to find Ian Wright and that important item. In other words, at least until that item was found, he was still safe. But no matter how you look at it, now, he could only hope that Mr. A would be a bit more capable. Klein rubbed his temples and waved his hand, using the gray fog to conceal the corpses of the extraordinary creatures. In an instant, his figure disappeared within the majestic palace above the grey fog. At the same time, Backland, Hillston District, 117 Bonningham Road. How about we just forget it? Furs sat on the sofa hugging a pillow, whispering hesitantly, I always feel like it's a bit unreliable. What's unreliable about it? The petite Hugh said indifferently, we're just acting as intermediaries to post the commission. Whatever happens afterward won't fall on us, isn't that easy? But, Furs shrunk her shoulders and whispered, did you forget what you did last time? Mr. A had been missing for a full half a month before holding an extraordinary gathering again a few days ago. It was because Hugh sold Mr. A's information to Ember. Although Mr. A was lucky not to die, it could be judged from his recent state that he definitely suffered a great loss. Now Hugh is going to find Mr. A again, entrusting him to assassinate an envoy from another country. Aren't you walking into a trap? No problem. Hugh patted her chest confidently and said, the one who caused him trouble last time was Ember. What does that have to do with me, Hugh Dilcha? What's more, didn't he not discover us when we attended the extraordinary gathering last time? Moreover, this commission has a reward of a full 1,000 gold pounds. Furs, can you bear to see a huge sum of 1,000 pounds slip away from your eyes for nothing? All right. Furs hesitated for a moment, gritted her silver teeth, then I'll go with you. No need. All right, let's go together then. Hugh was about to refuse, but upon meeting Furs's determined gaze, she had no choice but to give in and nod helplessly. Furs touched the stone bracelet on her wrist. Even if they encounter danger later, escaping is still not a problem for them. Hugh, Furs suddenly whispered, what do you think of Ember now? Huh? Hugh looked at Furs strangely, didn't Miss Audrey say he was on a business trip? How could it be a real business trip? Furs sighed, somewhat doubting her friend's intelligence. He just finished causing trouble for Mr. A, and then immediately went on a business trip. Furs wouldn't believe for a second that the two were unrelated. If not a business trip, what else could it be? Hugh looked at Furs strangely, puzzled. It's not like we didn't ask the Church of the Night, didn't Ember's captain, Mr. Al Hansen, admitted himself. That's why I'm worried. Furs said helplessly, Mr. A was seriously injured and hasn't shown up for more than half a month. Even if Ember is much stronger than Mr. A, he probably suffered significant injuries. Although it's said publicly that he's on a business trip, I estimate he's currently recuperating in some church. And that boy. Furs suddenly paused, hesitating to speak. Will Osepton? Hugh's expression changed slightly, you dreamed of him again. Yeah. Furs whispered, he asked me to tell Ember again that he's already dead and for Ember not to look for him anymore. Afternoon. Hillston District, inside Mr. A's new residence. 4,000 gold pounds. Mr. A's gaze moved back and forth between the two ladies in front of him, chuckling, don't you know the consequences of assassinating an envoy of a country? This could directly cause the ruined kingdom and the Intis Republic to go to war. Does someone like Mr. A still care about this? Hugh met Mr. A's gaze without fear and retorted. Indeed. Mr. A slowly leaned back, pressing his back against the sofa backrest, and said leisurely, I can take this task, but 4,000 gold pounds isn't enough, you need to add money. 10,000 gold pounds, this is the bounty amount for Vice Admiral Keelingos. Bake Lang's strength is definitely not as good as his, but the difficulty of assassination is not low. Believe me, he's worth this price. Okay. Hugh and Furs exchanged glances, nodded slightly, but also put forward their own requirements at the same time. We can pay a deposit of 2,000 gold pounds first, but the final payment must be settled after the task is completed. Also, Hugh paused and added, we received intelligence that Bake Lang is about to step down as envoy and return to his country, so this task must be completed within 3 days. Considering the danger and urgency of the commission, Audrey gave them great autonomy. 4,000 pounds was just a test, and in reality, Audrey's bottom line was 12,000 pounds. As long as it didn't exceed 12,000 pounds, they could make their own decisions. 3 days. Mr. A chuckled. Assassinating an envoy doesn't take 3 days. The money isn't on us, we'll send it over in the afternoon. Hugh said it without leaving a trace. Okay. Mr. A nodded, making a gesture to see them out. After the two left the mansion on their own, Mr. A's originally smiling expression instantly turned gloomy. More than half a month ago, Ember suddenly broke into his house, wiped out all his subordinates, and even destroyed the vessel for the Lord's descent. Although he was lucky not to die, his years of operation in Backland were thus ruined. Because the other party not only broke into his house and killed people, but also notified the Church of the Night in advance. As a result, the believers who had barely managed to survive were also encircled and suppressed by the Church of the Night afterward. This resulted in him still being the nominal person in charge of Backland, and although some peripheral members were lucky not to have their identities exposed, the extraordinary under his command were almost all killed or injured. Now he is simply a commander with no troops. In fact, if it weren't for the Dark Saint's strong protection, he probably wouldn't even be able to keep this position as a commander with no troops. That's why he had to quickly reconvene the extraordinary gathering. One reason was to develop some believers from these wild extraordinary. The second reason was to quickly raise funds to rebuild the Aurora Order's organizational structure. The 10,000 gold pounds delivered to his doorstep is indeed a good opportunity, but what if it's another trap? No, they wouldn't dare. Mr. A's tightly furrowed brows slightly relaxed. Assassinating an envoy of a country is not difficult for him. What if there is a conspiracy? The person who broke into his house was at least a demigod. Surely an envoy of a mere country wouldn't have a demigod guard, right? It was night. Braveheart's bar. Klein saw Marich again, who had refused him last time. And this time, the other party spoke directly. Is your commission still valid? Klein couldn't react for a moment. I have a friend who is short on money recently and is willing to accept this commission. However, she will only protect you for 3 days, for 1,000 pounds. Okay. Klein agreed without hesitation and asked further, when does it start? It can start now. Marich glanced at him in surprise, but 1,000 pounds is not a small amount, is it? Don't you need some time to prepare? No need. Klein looked calm. Money isn't important, life is. What's more, does he look like someone who lacks money? Holding dozens of extraordinary creature corpses in his hands, he is now rolling in wealth. Although those mountains of gold are not his. But that doesn't stop the things from being with him. The money in the bank isn't the bank's either, but no one would doubt that the bank has money, right? Otherwise, why would people rob banks? Oh, right. After a pause, Klein added, since the protection time is 3 days, let's pay in installments over 3 days, is that okay? No problem. Marich nodded. If the protection fails, the remaining money won't need to be paid, which is fair. Klein, now with a bodyguard, breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time couldn't help but mutter in his heart. 3 days should be enough, right? Even if Mr. A is useless, he's still a sequence 5. Killing an envoy should be quite easy for him. Unless, he takes the money and doesn't do the job. Klein's eye twitched, thinking of the worst kind of client. If Mr. A really takes the money and doesn't do the job, then he must ensure that these 3 days of protection are just right. Precisely the time when Envoy Bake Lang sends someone to assassinate him. As for how to grasp this timing, let him first perform a detailed divination. I'm going to the washroom. Klein said to Marich. Alger watched the Azure Avenger successfully return to a safe route, and while breathing a sigh of relief, explained, from here, we'll go directly west along the main route. It should only take about 5 days to reach Byam. You don't need to bring your sailors. Ember asked with some surprise. It's fine. Alger shrugged, I gave them a month's leave, they're overjoyed. In reality, that wasn't the case. If this were his ship, it wouldn't matter whether he brought these people or not. But he is a believer of the Storm Church, and the Azure Avenger also belongs to the Storm Church. Those sailors are usually helpful, but they are also surveillance. His current disappearance for more than a month, leaving those sailors behind for no reason, would also be a considerable hassle to explain afterward. But compared to explaining to the Storm Church, Alger didn't want to waste Ember's time over these trivial matters. After all, no matter what, the other party helped him greatly, so he naturally had to reciprocate. Of course, there's no need to let Ember know about these small matters. He could handle it himself. Alger added, my craftsman friend is in Byam. I can ask him to help modify the magical items you have then. Of course, those unused extraordinary materials can also be sold on the black market in Byam. Forget it. Ember gently shook his head, keeping these things might be useful. Okay. Alger immediately echoed and nodded. The things belonged to Ember, and he could handle them however he wanted. Alger naturally wouldn't say more. Ember thought for a moment and then casually said, as for the extraordinary creature corpses, you can handle them yourself. Sell as much as you can, and we'll split the money earned 50-50. 50-50. Alger was a little tempted. That batch of corpses could sell for at least over 100,000 gold pounds. If it's 50-50, he could get at least 80,000. This was undoubtedly a considerable temptation for Alger. No need. Alger took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, those extraordinary creatures are your spoils of war. I didn't put in much effort, so taking 50% would make me feel ashamed. 10% is enough, as my fee for helping you find buyers. If someone else came to him, he would earn at least 20% for this kind of job. But Ember's demand was large, and he had helped him greatly. Naturally, he had to give a friendly price. That works too. Ember didn't insist, just nodded indifferently. Chapter 103, The One Seduced by Fire. The evening of September 19th. 2 assassination attempts occurred in Baek Lang. Baek Lang, the ambassador of the Intis Republic, was assassinated and killed. The major newspapers in Baek Lang worked overtime that night to make this news the front-page headline. On the other hand, Klein, who also suffered an assassination attempt at his home, appeared calm and unperturbed. For instance, nothing was even damaged in this fight. Instead, it was Rosago delivering his head from 1,000 miles away. Through the seance, Klein obtained all the potion formulas for Sequence 7 Magician, Sequence 6 Faceless, and Sequence 5 Feet Marionettist, from the Diviner Pathway, as well as a pitch-black eye, contaminated by the true creator. If he wanted to purchase these items at an extraordinary gathering, they would be worth at least tens of thousands of pounds. But right now, Klein only spent 1,000 pounds. This made Klein feel somewhat grateful for Rosago's generosity. After this, to ensure everything was foolproof, Klein decided to do a careful divination. With nothing much to do, Klein took out a coin and chanted in a low voice. Baek Lang is dead. Clink. The 1-pence coin flipped and soared. Klein thought silently, it doesn't matter if he's not dead, I'll divine again tomorrow if he's not. Snap. The coin landed steadily in Klein's palm, heads up. This indicated affirmation. Excellent. Baek Lang is dead. Klein's heart filled with joy, and his tense state suddenly relaxed. Hillston District, in the living room of a terraced house. Mr. A, who had just completed the assassination and retreated successfully, was wearing a black hooded robe and kneeling in the darkness. In front of him was a small statue, a hanged man with his legs bound by chains connecting upwards. Cough, cough. Mr. A, who was originally chanting devoutly, suddenly coughed violently. He coughed up clumps of bloody fragments, and these fragments were still wriggling after they landed. But soon, Mr. A supported himself with both hands on the ground and bent down. In a devout posture, he pressed his mouth to the ground and licked back all the bloody fragments he had just coughed up. He even licked the corners of his lips as if he hadn't had enough. But the next second, Mr. A seemed to sense something and turned back sharply, alert. Where his gaze fell, a figure was quietly separating from the darkness. Dark Saint. Mr. A was startled and immediately lowered his head respectfully. Do you still remember the person who assassinated you last time? The Dark Saint walked out of the shadows and said slowly. I remember. Mr. A nodded without hesitation, gritting his teeth and saying, I'd recognize him even if he turned to ash. Very good. The Dark Saint nodded slightly and said slowly, the Lord has sent a divine oracle. Hearing this, Mr. A's expression immediately became solemn, and he lowered his head respectfully and devoutly. His name is Ember, you just need to find him, and then kill him. Mr. A raised his head, his expression somewhat excited. No. The Dark Saint said in a deep voice, help him. Mr. A's expression stiffened, and upon seeing the warning in the Dark Saint's eyes, he quickly lowered his head respectfully and said, yes, how should I help him? The Dark Saint nodded slightly, thinking, this child is teachable. Whatever he wants, you give him. The Dark Saint glanced at him calmly, but still reminded him, he should be investigating the clues of the Black Emperor now. If you meet again, be proactive and tell him all the information you know. Black Emperor. Mr. A raised his head in surprise, his eyes showing obvious confusion and incomprehension. Rune Royal Family. The Dark Saint did not explain in detail, but said concisely, if he asks, tell him about our cooperation with the Royal Family and the Witch Sect. What about the Royal Family and the Witch Sect? Mr. A hesitated slightly. They seemed to be in a cooperative relationship with both sides at the moment. If he revealed all the information, wouldn't that be purely selling out his teammates? Don't mind them, they are just a bunch of ignorant fools. The Dark Saint said indifferently, and what you need to do is to continue cooperating with them, while concealing your relationship with Ember. Whatever they ask you to do, you do it, and then inform Ember of what you have done. If necessary, I will also step in to assist. Mr. A became more and more confused the more he listened, feeling extremely perplexed. Although he had no objection to being a double agent, he wasn't being a complete double agent. On one hand, he had to help the royal family complete their plans, and on the other hand, he had to reveal all this information to Ember. What was the point of doing this? Mr. A hesitated and asked, he destroyed the vessel for the Lord's descent, why are we still helping him? The vessel is not important. The Dark Saint looked at him deeply, the Lord does not need to descend upon this world, but the Lord needs Ember to complete his mission, do you understand? I understand. Mr. A lowered his head and asked respectfully, Your Grace, forgive my presumption, you should know more than I do, why don't you contact him yourself? Praise the Lord. The Dark Saint suddenly chanted devoutly in a low voice, then his expression suddenly changed. After a long while, he slowly said, "It's not time yet. The speed at which Ember discovers the Black Emperor must be consistent with the royal family's plan. Before the royal family's plan is completed, he should not know more details. Otherwise, transferring fire will lose its meaning. In case of any change, you can inform him of hidden information about other gods to divert his attention." Transferring fire. Mr. A seemed to grasp some key point. The purpose of everything they were doing was to make the other party transferring fire. Then what was this transferring fire for? In the Church of the Night. Ember was clearly backed by the Church of the Night, which meant that the Church of the Night should know more information. So, was their goal also to make Ember transferring fire? "Your Grace," Mr. A asked in a low voice, "does the Church of the Night also hope that he transferring fire? If the goals are consistent, is there a possibility of us cooperating with the Church of the Night?" "No," the Dark Saint said in a deep voice, "don't trust them. The Church of the Night knows more than we do, but they may not want Ember to transferring fire." Bake Lang, St. Samuel Cathedral. In the Grand Prayer Hall, a lady wearing a simple linen robe stood below the altar, bowing her head devoutly. "Your Highness Ariana." An old man with no facial hair, wearing a black archbishop's robe with red trim, came to the Grand Prayer Hall, hesitating to speak. "Do you have a question?" Ariana's posture remained devout as she asked softly. "I don't understand." Archbishop Anthony was silent for a long time, asking the question that had been perplexing him all along. "The painting world also has a Saint Hall, why must we borrow the one from the Aurora Order?" "Time," Ariana said in a low voice, "the goddess needs time, and Benefactor also needs time. The Aurora Order's painting world can send Benefactor to the Sonia Sea, which can at least buy a month's time." Archbishop Anthony was silent. Although Ariana's words did not resolve the doubts in his heart, he did not ask any further questions. "When Benefactor returns, what should I do?" Archbishop Anthony was silent for a long time and asked softly. "Everything as usual." Ariana raised her head and said softly, "Satisfy all of Benefactor's needs. Except for the Black Emperor." Archbishop Anthony asked back. "Yes, except for the Black Emperor." "Why?" "Time." Ariana slightly parted her red lips, her tone ethereal, "The time is not right." After speaking, Ariana lowered her head again and continued to pray devoutly below the altar. As a devout follower of the goddess, she would not attempt to speculate on the goddess's intentions. For example, she would not secretly speculate that the reason the goddess did not allow the Benefactor to go to the painting world in Serenity Chapel was because she did not want the people in the painting world to know about the Benefactor's return. After all, the three sisters had been guarding the king's coffin in the painting world all along. If they knew that Benefactor had revived in the outside world, the goddess would likely face considerable trouble. Of course, these malicious speculations certainly had nothing to do with her, Ariana, a devout follower of the goddess. Chapter 104, So You're a Transmigrator too. September 24. At 2:40 p.m., Klein entered the mysterious space above the Fool in advance. In the majestic and ancient palace, he sat in the position of the Fool and took a deep breath. After all, it was his first time, he was a little nervous and needed to adapt in advance. He quickly conjured the dummy, whirled across the mottled bronze green long table and began to silently familiarize himself with the operation. At 3 p.m., rays of light rose within the giant's dwelling-like palace, and the members of the Tarot Club projected their blurry figures stained with a faint reddish hue. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." "Good afternoon, Mr. Lover." The clear and cheerful voice of the young girl echoed in the majestic palace, but her greeting stopped abruptly before she could finish. Because, this time, there were 3 more people in the Tarot Club. Furs and Zio's arrival was completely within Audrey's expectations. Because they had spent the previous night together during the full moon. Although they had been cautious and did not chant the honorable name of the Fool in front of her. But all of this was seen by Susie. After all, who would deliberately guard against a dog? But the other one, the figure sitting at the very end of the bronze long table, draped in a hooded black robe, was completely beyond her expectation. "These are the new members." Klein leaned back leisurely and introduced them one by one, Mr. World, Miss Magician, the Judgment. "Good afternoon, Mr. World, Miss Magician." The expressions of the Tarot Club members varied, but led by Audrey, they greeted the 3 new members one by one. The Fool, Justice, Lovers, Hanged Man, World, the Sun. Furs carefully matched the codenames with the individuals in her mind, while nodding in response to their greetings. But even a lazy fish like her would start thinking about her current situation internally. It was known that the honorable name given by Ember was indeed effective and could effectively suppress her curse. At the same time, this Tarot Club also genuinely existed. Then, There was a high probability that Ember was also in this gathering. Furs immediately cast a suspicious gaze towards Ember. The judgment was Zio, Mr. World was a newcomer like herself, and Miss Justice was female. The hanged man had blue hair and a seemingly gloomy personality. Mr. Sun should be a young boy, still very immature. Only that Mr. Lover, the more Furs looked, the more he resembled Ember. Especially since she had already assigned the seats in advance. And Zio also had the same thought. After all, they had been together day and night for a while. Even without seeing his face, they could be said to know Ember's figure like the back of their hand. World looked around but did not speak rashly, just silently watching Ember. Klein believed his clone was perfect and didn't worry that others could see through it. But Ember was an exception. After all, the other party had already discovered that Klein was a benefactor of the fool during their first meeting. If he spoke rashly and was exposed, wouldn't he be very embarrassed? Mr. Fool. Audrey was the first to break the silence, her voice clear. I have obtained 5 more pages of Rosal's diary. I still have 6 pages this time. Alger, who had remained silent, immediately stood up and bowed respectfully. Diary. Furs and Zio exchanged glances, both a little surprised. Klein nodded subtly. As soon as they conjured the diaries, they instantly disappeared and appeared in Klein's hand. Klein quickly scanned the trivial and uninformative records, he had seen too many of these already. Finally, his gaze settled on one of the pages, his pupils slightly contracting. January 1st, this is the beginning of a new year, and I have just completed the production of my first blasphemy card. Quote. I still remember the shock I felt when I first saw the blasphemy slate. So the extraordinary paths are truly God's paths, and the blasphemy slate is really blaspheming the gods. Above sequence 1 of every path, there is a sequence 0 and corresponding potion formulas and rituals. Each path can only have one sequence 0. And sequence 0 is the sequence where the true God resides. For example, sequence 0, the sun. Quote. These messages were shocking enough to stir up huge waves in Klein's heart. But he knew he couldn't stare at them for too long. That didn't fit the persona of the fool. He forcibly suppressed his shock and looked at another page of the diary. And once he looked, he couldn't take his eyes off it. April 1st, I met a man, a very special man. He wore Sog's armor, shouted, "Praise the sun," and charged into the enemy ranks, slaughtering all enemies in front of him like cutting melons and vegetables. Is this not Solaire in person? My first reaction was that someone was cosplaying, but then I thought today is April 1st, could someone be playing a joke on me? But then I thought again and realized it was even more wrong. I transmigrated, damn it. Where could someone get cosplay that looks so similar? But everything in front of me indicates that this man has countless connections with Sog. I suspect he is a transmigrator. Lu Xuan once said, make bold hypotheses, and be careful in seeking proof. I didn't dare to reveal my identity as a transmigrator, so I didn't rashly approach him. I chose to approach his sister. His sister Elena is truly a stunner, perfectly hitting my XP. Klein's eye twitched slightly. Emperor, you truly never forget to pursue women. Also, that sentence was said by Hushi, apologize to Hushi, you bastard. While complaining, Klein's attention never left the diary, and he continued to read. I have to say, Elena is great, really, very moist. It was her first time, but it was better than any noble lady I've encountered. As expected of a believer of the Knowledge Church, her theoretical knowledge is incredibly rich. Elena told me that she and her brother Tyron are both believers of the Knowledge Church. According to her, her brother Tyron's set of armor is standard for the Guardian Knights of the Knowledge Church. Amazing, Guardian Knights of the Knowledge Church shouting, praise the sun, aren't you guys stealing business from the Church of the Blazing Sun? I wonder what the Church of the Blazing Sun thinks of these people. However, looking at it this way, Tyron should not be a transmigrator. But it's certain that a high-ranking member of the Knowledge Church is definitely related to a transmigrator. And I strongly suspect that the God of Knowledge and Wisdom is this transmigrator. You know, the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom and the Eternal Blazing Sun Church have always been hostile to each other. Besides the God of Knowledge and Wisdom himself, no one else would dare let his believers shout, praise the sun. However, you, a dignified God of Knowledge and Wisdom, actually let your believers praise the sun instead of praising a Beck. I don't really approve. Klein's gaze continued downwards, only to find that a part below had been painted over. Further down, the content was noticeably different from the above. That's what I originally thought, but I was wrong. Elena told me that the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom has a painting, which contains a complete world. Isn't this the painting world? This almost completely overturned my previous understanding. I even suspected this was the world after the first fire was extinguished. But upon closer thought, it seemed impossible. After all, there are no rumors about the black soul in this world, and I've never heard of things like the first fire, bonfires, undead, or lords of cinder in this world. Hiss. Klein's eyes narrowed, and his mood tightened along with the content of the diary. Could it be that Rosal the Great made some astonishing discovery? The thought flashed through his mind. Klein didn't have time to think carefully and immediately looked down. Alina's little mouth is really good, her tongue is even more flexible than a snake. Quote. Klein's mouth twitched violently. Rosal the Great, are you being polite? I took off my pants and you show me this. Oh, no. It seems that taking off pants is exactly suitable for reading these. Getting back to the main topic, the possibility that the god of knowledge and wisdom is a transmigrator is still very high. Although the painting world is a bit outrageous, it's not completely unacceptable. After all, he is a god and a transmigrator, so there's a good chance he would imitate a game from his previous life and create a painting world. But no matter what the truth is, I have to find a way to sneak in and see. I wonder if it's still possible to convert to the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom now. Quote. After reading the diary, Klein remained silent. Although he no longer held any expectations for Rosal the Great's integrity, it still exceeded his expectations. He could only say, as expected of him. However, is the God of Knowledge and Wisdom also a transmigrator? This possibility cannot be ruled out. But combined with Ember's existence, Klein had another guess in his heart. The God of Knowledge and Wisdom might just be simply referencing something. But the various things Ember had shown completely proved that this was a ruthless person who had been to the Black Soul world and had personally experienced the transferring fire. He even wanted to burn himself. And besides that, that goddess of the night clearly knew something. At least she knew Ember's identity, otherwise, it would have been impossible for her to recruit Ember immediately and even kindly tell him that the first Lord of Cinder was the Black Emperor. So, what was the identity of the goddess of the night? Klein's original guess was that the goddess of the night, like Ember, was a transmigrator who had been to the Black Soul world. And if that were the case, by analogy, the god of knowledge and wisdom was likely also the same. This could explain the goddess of the night's familiarity with Ember and the god of knowledge and wisdom's insistence on referencing things. But if that were the case, wouldn't he and Rosal the Great seem a bit out of place? Everyone is a transmigrator, why could you guys go to the Black Soul world first? Too little information, better not guess wildly. Klein sighed and put down the diary in his hand. Leaving aside these uncertain mysteries for now, the known information was still of extremely high value. For example, sequence 0 feet. Did the Emperor regret not choosing the diviner, apprentice, or thief paths because their corresponding sequence 0 had not yet appeared? Very likely. Who? Klein let out a long breath, adjusted his mindset, and looked at Audrey. Miss Justice, you did very well. You dealt with Bake Lang on the third day after posting the commission. As agreed, what kind of reward do you wish to receive? May the goddess bless, hope Miss Justice's request isn't too difficult. Klein thought silently in his heart. No, I should still owe you, no, owe your benefactor the reward. Audrey rolled her eyes, pondered for a few seconds, and smiled faintly. The bounty for Vice Admiral Keelingos is a total of 30,000 pounds, I should give your benefactor 15,000 pounds. Of that, assassinating Bake Lang cost 10,000 pounds, so I still need to pay an additional 5,000 pounds. However, because of the Bake Lang matter, my financial situation isn't too good recently. This reward will need to wait a few months, Mr. Fool, is that alright? Although she could ask her father for money, it would be difficult to find a reason. After all, she couldn't just say she recently joined the Tarot Club and was short on cash, right? Then her father would definitely think she had joined some cult. Alright. Klein nodded subtly, his heart filled with gratitude. It had to be Miss Justice. Look how high her awareness was. World cleared his throat, seamlessly taking over the conversation, and said in a hoarse voice, Mr. Fool told me that I can post missions and collect materials here, is that right? Yes. Miss Audrey, who had just completed the Fool's commission, nodded elegantly. World continued in a hoarse voice, I hope to obtain the true root of a mist treant, at least 60 milliliters of its corresponding juice, as well as the medullary crystal of the elf spring, and all the spinal fluid of a demonic pattern Black Panther. Can any of you provide these, or have relevant clues? What do you wish for in exchange? Derek, who had been silent, suddenly spoke. I know where there are mist treants and can help you acquire the materials. However, I must wait until I complete my advancement, have sufficient strength, and join the corresponding patrol team. Then what do you wish to obtain? Klein was overjoyed and continued to ask through, World. The potion formula for sequence 8 feet Priest of Light. Son, Derek. Derek answered without hesitation. I have the Priest of Light formula. Klein was extremely pleased, the corners of his mouth turned up. Fortunately, he had kept a trick up his sleeve and hadn't directly given the sequence 8 potion formula to the Sun back then. Otherwise, the other party would be asking for the Sun Priest potion formula now. And, Klein glanced at Ember, his eye twitching. He also had to thank Ember, thank him for not stealing his business. He also had to thank the Sun, thank him for not having fully digested the Cantor formula yet. Otherwise, this business would probably not have been his to do. No problem. World immediately agreed in a hoarse voice. The main material for sequence 7 is worth between 500 and 700 pounds, while the potion formula for sequence 8 is only worth 450 pounds. What compensation do you need? No need. Sun thought for a moment and said seriously, just give me the potion formula. 450 and 500, the difference didn't seem that big. Derek felt that giving up wasn't a big deal and might as well do a favor. In an instant, a thought simultaneously appeared in the minds of the Tarot Club members. This is truly a simple good child. That's not a difference of 1 or 2 pounds, but 1 or 200 pounds. Furs couldn't help but look at the Sun a few more times. Such a simple child was rare. World also didn't want to bully a good child. After writing down the Priest of Light formula, he immediately gave it to the other party. Then, he said in a hoarse voice, I will give you an extra 150 pounds. You can keep it for trading with others next time. I still owe Miss Justice 500 pounds. Son, Derek. Derek heard this and suddenly remembered that he still owed money, and immediately said, can you help me repay Miss Justice directly? Okay. World nodded and continued to ask in a hoarse voice, what about the spinal fluid of the demonic pattern Black Panther? Does any of you have it? Although, World was asking, his peripheral vision was glancing at Ember. He knew Ember had it. Why? Because the corpse of the demonic pattern Black Panther was still lying above the gray fog. Although its corpse was there, the spinal fluid, as an extraordinary material, had disappeared. It was clearly taken by the hanged man in advance and given to Ember. Ember thought for a moment and slowly said, I have the spinal fluid of the demonic pattern Black Panther, 700 pounds. Ember looked at the top of World's head, his expression somewhat puzzled. Open black lens bracket World close black lens bracket. This was the first time he had encountered such a situation. Why was there no name? Okay. World agreed without hesitation, then changed the subject, but I don't have that much money right now. As Mr. World spoke, he looked at Miss Audrey again and asked, Miss Justice, can the remaining 5,000 pounds of Keelingo's bounty be transferred to me first? Huh. Miss Audrey blinked, immediately realizing that he was referring to the 5,000 pounds she owed the fool's benefactor. In other words, Mr. World is the fool's benefactor. Miss Audrey subconsciously looked at the fool, who showed no reaction to this. But the fool's lack of reaction was equivalent to acquiescence. Miss Audrey quickly reacted and said quickly, yes, but I don't have that much money right now. Mr. World, can I give you 5,000 pounds over 5 months, 1,000 pounds each month? No problem. Mr. World nodded slightly, feeling incredibly pleased. Look, as long as he admitted his identity as a benefactor, he could easily get a huge sum of 5,000 pounds. How wonderful is this death? As for whether admitting his identity as a benefactor would have any disadvantages, Klein no longer cared about these. If you ask why, of course, it's because his identity had already been seen through by Ember. Since Ember knew that Klein was the fool's benefactor, the identity of World certainly couldn't be concealed. After all, World was originally a disguise prepared for Klein. Since that was the case, it was better to admit it generously. One word, let it go. Since it was already exposed, he might as well expose it completely and break the pot. At least this way, he could still get the 5,000 pounds from Miss Audrey. Since that was the case, why not be happy about it? Moreover, this way, the money to buy the evil pattern Black Panther's spinal cord from Ember would also be smoothly obtained. Now he just had to wait for the Sun to get the root of the Misty Treant, and he could start preparing to advance to Magician. As for the medullary crystal of the Elf Spring, he didn't expect to get it at all. And it didn't matter if he couldn't get it, it was just a facade anyway. As for the potion, he had already completely digested it. The moment he realized he was like a clown. Mr. World is Mr. Fool's benefactor. Alger was also shocked by this news, finding it somewhat unbelievable yet feeling reasonable. For example, all of them were sitting on both sides of the bronze long table, while only World was sitting opposite Mr. Fool. This already showed that their relationship was extraordinary. Originally, this tarot club was just a carnival for outsiders like them, but now that Mr. Fool's benefactor had joined, did this mean some degree of acceptance? Alger's spirits lifted, feeling a sense of joy and excitement as if he had joined the high ranks of a church. Mr. Lover. Miss Audrey asked in a somewhat expectant voice, have you found any leads on the extraordinary materials I entrusted you with? I have the mirror dragon's eyes and blood, and Mr. Hanged Man has the elder tree's fruit. Ember nodded slightly and explained, a total of £1,500, is that okay? No problem. Miss Audrey hesitated for a moment, then nodded in agreement. She didn't have that much money right now. First, she had to give Ember £1,000 every month, and second, she had to give Mr. Fool's benefactor £1,000. Adding the £1,500 for buying the extraordinary materials, that was a total of £3,500. But her monthly allowance was only £1,000, which was not enough at all. But it didn't matter, she believed that Earl Hall would not refuse to buy one or two extraordinary materials for his daughter. World scanned the surroundings and said hoarsely, in addition to that, I also hope to obtain information on all the fallen nobles in the ruined kingdom, including their current addresses, the more detailed the better. As he spoke, he subconsciously glanced at Miss Audrey. After all, among the people present, only Miss Audrey could complete his request. Miss Justice felt World's gaze and puffed out her cheeks. Why could anyone guess that she was a noble of the ruined kingdom? All right. Miss Audrey sighed helplessly in her heart, but only asked, but can I ask what World wants this information for? Mr. World is Mr. Fool's benefactor, and what he does is likely at Mr. Fool's instruction. So Miss Audrey didn't speak too directly, just asked indirectly. World chuckled hoarsely, you don't need to worry, I'm just looking for something and won't cause them any harm. I can swear on this, with Mr. Fool as my witness. I need some time to collect and complete it, it will take about 3 or 4 days, is that okay? Miss Audrey thought for a moment and replied with a more cautious statement. No problem. World chuckled deeply. This efficiency is too high, isn't it? Furs and Zio, who were sitting next to Miss Audrey, exchanged glances. Even though they couldn't see each other's expressions, they could tell the other was numb. Everything in the Tarot Club exceeded their expectations. For example, Mr. Fool, this is a genuine true god. In gathering of extraordinary people convened by a true god, they had never heard of such a thing. Rather, this was absolutely the first time in history, right? Moreover, the efficiency of the Tarot Club was also astonishingly high. In the past, they had almost never obtained what they wanted at the extraordinary gatherings in Backland. Zio had been seeking the Law Enforcer potion formula for 3 years, and Furs herself had also been trying to collect the Trick Master potion formula at extraordinary gatherings for over 2 years. They had participated in at least 100 extraordinary gatherings, but not a single one was successful. But neither she nor Zio had ever obtained what they wanted. And other wild extraordinary were the same. Very few people could obtain their desired items at a gathering. But in the Tarot Club, the two of them could reach an agreement after just a few words. And at the moment, they had more or less figured out the positioning of the people in the Tarot Club. For example, Miss Justice is a rich lady with countless pounds. And Mr. World is Mr. Fool's benefactor, whose status alone is a level higher than theirs. Moreover, he is also suspected to possess a considerable number of potion formulas. And Mr. Sun, Mr. Lover, and Mr. Hanged Man are providers of extraordinary materials. They have an unimaginable amount of extraordinary materials in their hands. And this is also the reason why the Tarot Club can be so efficient. After all, they are not short of money, extraordinary materials, or potion formulas, so how could the transaction not be smooth? Mr. Hanged Man. After finishing the topic of payment with World, Justice continued to look at Hanged Man, Alger and asked, when will you be able to return from the sea? It will take about 2 more weeks. Alger pondered for a moment and replied, we are about to arrive at Byam and will stay there for a while, it shouldn't exceed 3 days. After that, we can go directly to Pritz Harbor, the journey will not exceed 10 days. So if nothing unexpected happens, we can return to Backland within 2 weeks. Furs keenly caught this word, and combined with Lover, knowing the extraordinary materials in Mr. Hanged Man's hands so well before, she was certain that referred to the two of them. Combined with Byam being the capital of the Rothschild Islands on the Sunia Sea. It was easy to deduce the conclusion. Lover is on the Sunia Sea now. And if he is really Ember, did he really go on a business trip? But why would he go to the Sonia Sea for no reason? Miss Magician, Miss Judgment. Miss Justice asked with some enthusiasm, do you have any needs? Not for now. Furz's expression was a little awkward, and she could only manage to muddle through. She did want to exchange some items at the Tarot Club. But she had no money. Even with the £1,000 reward from Miss Audrey, and splitting it 50-50 with Zio, each person only got £500. Plus her meager savings, it was just enough to buy the astrologer potion formula from Ember. As for Zio, she was even poorer than herself. Zio seemed to sense something and looked up, her gaze meeting Furz's. Both of them suddenly felt a little awkward. Why did they always feel out of place in the atmosphere of the Tarot Club? It was as if two poor people had mixed in among a group of rich people, who were making various large-scale transactions, while they could only watch from the side. Give it your all, Miss Magician, Miss Judgment. Klein looked at the two ladies and couldn't help but sigh. To be honest, he paid a price for bringing these two up. Pulling people up to the Fool had strict restrictions. For example, before he became an extraordinary, he could only pull up two people. One was Justice, and the other was Hanged Man. After he became a diviner, he could pull up one more person, which was Ember. Only after digesting the diviner potion could he pull up the Sun. And by the time he reached the Magician, and subsequent sequences, it should be the same, barring any accidents. He could pull up one person when he became a clown, and he could pull up a second person after digesting the clown potion. And now, Magician and Judgment just happened to occupy these two slots. This also meant that he could no longer pull people up to the Fool before becoming a sequence 7 feet magician. As for this pattern, Klein actually had a guess. Before becoming an extraordinary, he could only pull up two people, and from sequence 9 to sequence 1, he could pull up two people for each sequence. Adding them up, there were a total of 20 people. But if you add the sequence 0 feet he just learned about today, that's a total of 22 people. And coincidentally, there are a total of 22 major arcana in the tarot cards. There are a total of 22 chairs on the Fool, 10 on each side, and one in front and one behind. Even further, there are also 22 extraordinary pathways in this world. The last one is hard to say. But the first few 22s must have some deep connection. Klein was absolutely certain of this. Too many coincidences are absolutely not just simple coincidences. It's just a little regrettable that he doesn't know what the connection between them is yet. But it doesn't matter. He will find it sooner or later. Mr. World. Zio hesitated for a long time, then said hesitantly, "Can I accept the request to collect information on the fallen nobles?" Of course. Klein's eyes shifted slightly, and he nodded calmly, "As long as it's not duplicated, I will also give corresponding rewards." For him, there was no harm in having one more person collect information. As for whether this would cause conflict between Miss Justice and Miss Judgment, Klein didn't think so. After all, they were on different levels and had different channels for collecting information. There was no reason for them to conflict over such a small matter. What's more, they might even know each other in reality. Klein thought of this, and his expression suddenly became a little strange. As soon as the Tarot Club ended, the members who had reached a deal immediately began trading. By sacrificing to the Fool, the traded items were transferred to the trading parties. And since Ember and Alger were on the same ship, there was no need to waste time and effort transferring twice. Therefore, Alger directly sacrificed on their behalf, handing over all the items to the Fool. And Klein had been guarding the Fool and had not left. After receiving the £2,500 sacrificed by Miss Justice, he bestowed £2,200 of it to Alger. At the same time, he also bestowed the Mirror Dragon's eyes, blood, and the Elder Tree's fruit, which belonged to Miss Justice, to her. In the end, he was left with only one extraordinary material. The spinal fluid of the evil pattern Black Panther. It was a seemingly transparent liquid, but if observed closely, one would find that its clarity was layered, becoming more transparent the further down it went, perfectly segmented section by section, fully satisfying the ideas of someone with OCD. Only the true root and juice of the misty treant are left. While Klein breathed a sigh of relief, a new idea popped into his mind. It seemed that the sequence 7 of different pathways had some similarities. That is, in addition to the two main materials, the blood of the extraordinary creature to which one of the main materials belongs seems to be required. For example, he needed the juice of the misty treant, while Miss Justice needed the blood of the Mirror Dragon. Is there also something particular about this? Lover is Ember. In the house at 117 Bonningham Road, Hillston District, Furs and Zio, who had just woken up, asked the same question almost in unison. It should be him. Furs said with certainty, both his speaking habits and physique are exactly the same, I don't think there's a second possibility. But why would he suddenly go to the Sonia C? Zio frowned, feeling a little puzzled. How would I know? Furs rolled her eyes, I can only ask him in person next time. What about your matter? Zio hesitated for a moment and whispered, are you going to tell him about it? Yesterday was the full moon night. To encourage Furs, she and Furs together chanted the true name of Mr. Fool. That's why they were pulled up to the Fool together. And with the protection of Mr. Fool, the ravings on the full moon night would no longer trouble Furs. But at some point, she seemed to have been targeted by the curse named, Will Osepton again. Forget it. Furs shook her head and said softly, let's wait until he comes back before telling him. ... We should arrive at Byam before evening. Alger walked out of the captain's cabin and said to Ember, who was standing on the deck watching the scenery, if everything goes smoothly, it might not take 3 days, maybe we can finish it tomorrow. Also, Alger paused for a moment and handed £1,500 in banknotes to Ember, this is your share. Is your craftsman friend reliable? Ember took the money and suddenly asked. It should be fine. Alger originally wanted to say reliable, but after a moment of hesitation, he said cautiously, I've been working with him for a while, and his character is guaranteed. And even if he wanted to inform, he might not have the channels. Is that so? Ember murmured softly, I hope your friend is reliable. Alger's mouth twitched slightly, but he also felt a little wary in his heart. He hadn't considered this issue before. But if the craftsman was really unreliable, then they would have to find a way to make the craftsman shut up. Even if Ember didn't act out of consideration for him, Alger would not let the other party go. After all, leaking customer information was a taboo. Even if they were familiar with each other, they couldn't break the rules. Chapter 105, So It Was You, You Dog Thing. City of Generosity, Byam. After the Azure Avenger docked at the port, Alger took Ember and circled around the city a few times. Shaking off potential followers and observers, he finally brought Ember to a house and rang the doorbell. This was the residence of the craftsman Alger had found for Ember. Ding-a-ling. Not long after the bell rang, the front door of the house was opened. A lean, middle-aged man with flaxen hair and slightly tanned skin appeared from behind the door, looking at Alger with some surprise. Alger, is that you? Come in and talk. Alger nodded slightly at him. Okay. The craftsman shrugged, clearly trusting Alger implicitly, and stepped aside without suspicion to let the two in. Let me introduce you. Alger pointed at each of them in turn and introduced, this is Sharv, a highly skilled craftsman. I believe he can meet your needs. This is Ash, he hopes to commission you to craft 2 mystical items. No problem. Sharv said straightforwardly, just pay up, and also, remember to explain your requirements for the mystical items before I start, otherwise I won't be responsible after they're finished. Help me change the appearance. Ember thought for a moment and pulled out a dark iron metal glove from somewhere. All right. Sharv glanced at it, his expression shifting slightly, but he still nodded gently. However, before he finished speaking, Ember pulled out a few more mystical items. An ordinary-looking tin pocket watch, a rather simple-looking 4-leaf clover charm, and a large pistol that seemed crudely made. ... Sharv suddenly fell silent for a long time and asked, is there anything else? No, just these 4. Ember shook his head and asked, how long will it take to modify them? This might take a long time. Sharv hesitated for a long time, his expression slightly uneasy, and said, also, this will cost £1,000. Ember was not surprised by this, counted out 20 £10 notes, and handed them over. After all, Alger had reminded him before coming that the craftsman's crafting fee would be charged. Sharv accepted the money silently. He didn't even have the thought of exchanging pleasantries with Alger, just stared at him silently. This gaze made Alger feel a bit strange, but he didn't think too much of it. He just greeted him and prepared to leave. Just as the two were about to leave the door, Sharv suddenly called out to them. Alger. Sharv took a deep look at Alger's back and suddenly said, the mystical item you commissioned me to make last time is ready. Come with me. Wait a moment. Alger looked at Sharv with some confusion. But he didn't say much, offered an apologetic word to Ember, and then followed him towards the inner room. Who exactly is he? Sharv closed the bedroom door and asked in a deep voice. Alger frowned slightly and said without hesitation, he is my friend, absolutely trustworthy. Is there a problem? A big problem. Hearing Alger say he was trustworthy, Sharv instead showed a bitter smile. Those mystical items of his, do you know their origin? Alger mused for 2 seconds, not concealing anything, and said concisely, he has some conflict with military intelligence 9 of the Ruined Kingdom. These are trophies he obtained from extraordinaries from military intelligence 9. Saying that, Alger raised an eyebrow and asked back, could it be that you're scared? Yes. Sharv nodded without hesitation, which instead surprised Alger a little. You know. Sharv seemed very nervous, and after finally sorting out his thoughts, His words were still a bit chaotic. I am a craftsman. My previous sequence was appraiser. I can quickly appraise the abilities and grades of mystical items. 2 of his 4 mystical items are at the sequence 5 level. One is that glove, and one is that lucky clover. I know. Alger nodded without surprise, but this only made him more confused. Is there a problem? He already knew that Ember could kill a sequence 5 extraordinary. It's not strange for him to have mystical items at the sequence 5 level. As a craftsman, Sharv lacks self-preservation abilities due to being from the savant's pathway. But he is at least a sequence 6 feet mechanical expert, and has crafted many mystical items at the sequence 5 level. Furthermore, he doesn't have a good impression of the ruined kingdom itself, otherwise he wouldn't be staying in an overseas colony. Just these 2 items shouldn't be enough to make him this panicked. Sharv smiled bitterly. The problem lies with the remaining 2 mystical items. They are at the sequence 4 level. Sequence 4, Demigod. Alger's expression stiffened, and he finally reacted. That's why I asked you if he is trustworthy. Sharv's face was full of worry, and he said helplessly, if he's not trustworthy, both of us will lose our lives. Don't worry. Alger quickly adjusted, and said in a deep voice, I stand by what I said, he is absolutely trustworthy. But, Alger gave him a deep look, on the premise that you don't try to pull any tricks. Mystical items at the sequence 4 level can only be wielded by a demigod who is also at sequence 4. It could be a coincidence that Ember has 1 mystical item at the sequence 4 level, but having 2 can only mean he once killed a sequence 4 extraordinary. And if he guessed correctly, this should have happened recently. That is, in the period from when he appeared at sea until he met me. And for any power, extraordinaries above demigod are absolute top pillars. The death of any demigod will severely cripple a power. And once the news leaks out, Ember will likely be hunted to death by this power. Do you think I'm stupid? Sharv asked back with a bitter smile. Not to mention that he should have kept it confidential for his customer in the first place, the cost of leaking it alone is something he cannot bear. Do your job well. Alger patted Sharv's shoulder and encouraged him. Wait. Seeing Alger about to leave, Sharv suddenly grabbed him and handed him a ring. This is the mystical item you ordered last time, the Whip of Mind. It was originally planned to be sold for £4,000. I'll give you a 25% discount, £3,000 please, thank you. Are you robbing me? Alger's face instantly darkened. Do you want it or not? Sharv asked back. I'll give you the rest next time. Alger took a deep breath, pulled out £2,000 from his pocket, shoved it all to the other party, and said through gritted teeth. No need. Sharv's face also darkened when he saw the other party couldn't produce the money, and he said grumpily, consider the rest as me buying you a drink, but... Sharv cautioned, make sure your friend doesn't find out about our conversation. He certainly didn't want to be targeted by a demigod. You still don't trust how I handle things. Alger retorted, making Sharv a bit awkward. Seeing this, Alger didn't make things difficult, just snorted coldly and turned to leave. He seemed to be expressing dissatisfaction with Sharv's suspicion. And when the 2 walked out of the room, Alger's expression had somehow returned to normal. On the surface, there was nothing unusual. Got the item, let's go. Alger raised the ring on his hand and said with a smile to Ember at the door. You might not believe it. Not far from Sharv's house, Alger touched the ring on his hand, the corners of his mouth turning up. Although this ring is not as useful as yours, because it is made from a combination of extraordinary characteristics from 2 different pathways, its value is at least £4,000. And I only spent £2,000, which is thanks to you. Oh, Ember was slightly surprised, isn't this the mystical item you ordered from him? What does it have to do with me? He lied. Alger shrugged and said casually, 2 of your 4 mystical items are at the sequence 5 level, and the other 2 are at the sequence 4 level. So he used the excuse of me having a pre-ordered mystical item to take me into the room, but his real purpose was to inquire about your information. And this mystical item, he sold it to me at cost price. An ordinary mystical item at the sequence 7 level is priced at around £2,000. Of that, £1,600 is the cost of the extraordinary characteristics, and £400 is the crafting fee. And if you buy 2 mystical items at the sequence 7 level, the value is around £4,000. But if it's a mystical item made from 2 types of extraordinary characteristics, its value will skyrocket. It can sell for at least £5,000 or even £6,000. Because mystical items all have side effects. While using a mystical item, you will also be affected by the side effects they bring. Using 2 mystical items means enduring 2 side effects simultaneously. But if it's a mystical item composed of 2 different extraordinary characteristics, while having functions comparable to 2 mystical items, it only needs to bear 1 side effect. It is precisely because of this that such mystical items formed by mixing extraordinary characteristics from different sequences are quite valuable. This ring is considered Sharv's practice piece. It combines the extraordinary characteristics of a sequence 7 and a sequence 9 item. If viewed separately, the value is at least above £2,700. And when the two are combined, their value is at least above £3,500. And due to their rarity and circulation, the premium can even rise to £4,000. And now, for a mystical item worth at least £4,000, Alger only spent £2,000. It barely covers Sharv's cost of making it, and he might not even make back his costs. This situation can generally only be described in two words: massive profit. Furthermore, this wasn't Alger deliberately taking advantage of Sharv, it was the other party forcing him to take advantage. I see. Upon hearing Alger's explanation, Ember showed a look of understanding but didn't express anything further. As if this matter was just commonplace for him and not worth paying attention to. Although that was indeed the truth. As expected, he doesn't care. Alger's expression was slightly boastful, but his eyes were constantly observing Ember's expression. Seeing that the other party's expression was still relaxed, he couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief in his heart. Although Ember killing a demigod also startled him, he couldn't possibly conceal this matter. Firstly, Sharv holds a high position in his heart, but not as high as Ember and the Tarot Club. It's not worth him concealing information from Ember for Sharv's sake. Secondly, Alger didn't dare to bet that Ember hadn't overheard their conversation. After all, the number of mystical items the other party possessed was beyond his imagination, and since he could kill a demigod, he must also be at a corresponding rank himself. Just a wall could not possibly block the other party's prying, even if Sharv had made arrangements. Rather than concealing this conversation and causing a rift in their relationship, it was better to lay everything out. Now it seems his choice was indeed correct. Will he run away? Ember suddenly asked. Probably not. Alger replied, then hesitated, but not necessarily. Sharv has never been very brave. So it's unlikely he would dare to pocket your mystical items and run away. But precisely because he's not brave, he might also run away out of fear. Should I go back and keep an eye on him? Those were a full 4 extraordinary items. Just the 2 mystical items at sequence 5 were worth tens of thousands of gold pounds. Not to mention the 2 mystical items at the sequence 4 level, their value cannot be measured by money at all. If something really goes wrong, Alger would truly be unable to escape death as atonement. After all, he was the one who introduced the person to Ember. Alger wouldn't dare to gamble on Sharv's character at this time. No need. Ember said casually, he can't run. That's true. Alger showed understanding. Leaving aside the fact that they were at sea, even if the other party wanted to run, where could he go? Alger thought to himself that if it came to speed, his Azure Avenger was definitely one of the best at sea. He could let Sharv run first. Moreover, although they only had 2 people, don't forget that Ember had the ability to summon soul bodies. Although the other party didn't say it, there were probably soul bodies guarding outside Sharv's mansion. What's next? Alger's tone shifted, and he suddenly asked with a smile, are we going to the hotel, or are we going to play in the city first? What's fun? Ember asked with interest. Alger shrugged and said frankly, if you ask me, my answer is no different from that of ordinary pirates. To borrow Rosal the Great's words, there are 3 essential things in life: strong liquor, women, and gambling. Then let's go to the casino. Ember looked at his luck value of 99 plus and suddenly said, my luck is pretty good. I can give it a try. Alright. Alger smiled and said, but you have to be careful. Rosal the Great said that small gambling is good for the mood, but big gambling hurts the body. If you lose all your money, we'll have to sleep on the streets tonight. It's not a big problem. Ember said confidently, I'll only gamble £1. That's not impossible, but... Alger nodded lightly, but hesitated at the end, saying, can you take off your rings for now? Why? Ember asked in surprise. Mainly because they are a bit too conspicuous. Alger spread his hands and said helplessly, it doesn't matter if you lose money, but if you win money, it might cause some trouble and make it difficult to leave the casino. Okay. Ember thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. Anyway, he could wear these rings at any time with a thought, so taking them off didn't really matter. He didn't take them off before mainly because there was no need. After thinking for a moment, Ember took off almost all the rings, leaving only one golden ring with a coiled snake design. The plan went smoothly. Somewhere in Backland, a graceful figure stood by the window, looking out at the blood moon outside the window. The lady had excellent proportions and was dressed in a slightly strange manner, but at this moment, she seemed to be frowning deeply. Her delicate cherry lips slightly parted and closed, as if she was muttering to herself in a low voice. They have no suspicion of me. Fate made everything just right. The moment I knew, 008, it also knew me. It wrote me into the story, and coincidence made all of this logical. The vessel for the true creator's descent was destroyed, and I successfully advanced to sequence 2 Sage. The goddess of the night has not appeared, and the servant of secrets Ariana is acting on her behalf. They seem to have reached some kind of cooperation with the Aurora Order. Archbishop Anthony's rank is limited, he doesn't even know the whereabouts of that benefactor named Ash. However, according to all indications, he seems to be at sea now. The Church of the Night seems to want him to stay away from Backland temporarily, but probably doesn't want him to leave the sphere of influence of the Ruined Kingdom. Therefore, the most likely place for him to appear now should be in the Sonia Sea. Of course, this is just my guess. When he returns to Backland, the Church of the Night might arrange for me to have further contact with him. So, the lady looked up at the pure, bright, clear blue full moon in the sky and said softly, "Are you satisfied?" Byam, in an ordinary residential building not far from the governor's mansion. In the spacious basement, candles burned quietly, casting a dim yellow light around. On the stone steps leading up to the ground, a shadow gradually lengthened under the dim yellow light. Soon, a figure appeared in the basement. He wore a formal tailcoat, a black trench coat, and his brown hair was neatly combed back. His eyes were not large, but bright and expressive, and he had a shallow beard around his mouth, making him look like a gentleman. His name was Audel, Silver Coin Viper, Audel. But at this moment, this gentleman seemed a little nervous, looking at the middle-aged man whose half-body was still shrouded in shadow under the dim yellow light, his body trembling slightly. "Help me find someone." The middle-aged gentleman turned his head and spoke in a low, hoarse voice. "Of course, no problem, Lord Senor." Audel lowered his head, hiding the surprise in his eyes, and said respectfully, "Who are you looking for? What are his characteristics?" Blood Admiral. Senor wore an old tricorn hat, his eye sockets were deeply sunken, and his face was terrifyingly pale, looking more like a malevolent spirit than a human. He raised his hand to wipe the 2 black mustaches above his lip and said slowly. "The characteristics are very obvious. He wears 10 oddly shaped rings at all times." Looking for someone wearing 10 rings. Audel was slightly stunned, his expression extremely surprised, and he hesitated. "Then, is the person you are looking for a man or a woman?" Senor glanced at Audel coldly, his voice clearly carrying a hint of threat. "That's not your business. You just need to find him and give me the information." Of course, of course." Audel nodded in agreement repeatedly, feeling extremely fearful in his heart, and hurriedly said respectfully, "Lord Senor, Vivian is still waiting for you at home. I wonder when you will be honored to visit my humble abode again." "Tonight, get out." Senor sneered. Audel respectfully lowered his head and backed up the stone steps. After Audel left the basement, Senor turned to look at the altar covered with dried, mottled bloodstains, and said with an attitude more respectful than Audel had towards him. "Lord Jex, do you have any other instructions? Is he trustworthy?" A cold voice came from behind the curtain hanging around the altar. Then, the curtain seemed to come alive, rolling up on both sides, smoothly tying itself into a knot and falling in the center of the altar. A slightly transparent figure appeared beside the altar at some point. His skin was brownish, the wrinkles on his face formed deep furrows, and his white hair was as sparse as autumn leaves. He seemed to have lived for many, many years. "Of course not, Lord Jex." Senor didn't dare to look up, only said respectfully, "Audel is a despicable merchant. The word, trustworthy, has never been associated with him. However, he does have extremely outstanding ability in collecting information. We can only cooperate with him now." "Who is Vivian?" Jex stared at Senor, his voice cold and devoid of any emotion. "She is Audel's mistress." Senor quickly explained. "You can indulge in pleasure, but don't delay in completing the god's command." "Yes, Lord Jex." Jex didn't look at him again, only fixing his gaze on the candlelight around the altar. His gaze was humble, yet seemed to carry a hint of doubt. Today's god seemed a bit strange, the feeling he got was different from before. But he had indeed received the oracle. "Lord Jex." Senor hesitated for 2 seconds and said in a low voice, "May I ask, what is the complete content of the oracle?" Jex glanced at him and said lightly, "Find the divine envoy wearing 10 strange rings, and have him try his best to find and collect the 22 blasphemy cards, especially the moon card." Jex hesitated for a moment, then continued, "Also, the mother card. Damn it. He won again. What the hell? How can he win this? Bet with him. As long as I bet with him, I can do it too. Right, good brother, lend me some money, I'm sure to win this time." Listening to the noise of the surrounding crowd, Alger looked at Ember, who was still calm and composed beside him, his eyelids twitching slightly. Before coming, he had planned to just play a few rounds. As a result, Ember had used 1 gold pound to play until now, winning a total of over 10,000 gold pounds. This was truly making a huge profit with a small investment. He was sitting right next to him and couldn't see how Ember was cheating. It seemed like he had genuinely won purely by luck. Could it be that he had a magical item that boosted luck? But Alger glanced at the dealer's ashen face, his expression strange. Within the Ruined Kingdom, casinos were illegal. But in the kingdom's vast overseas colonies, it was not only legal but also a pillar industry. And Byam was the best among them. But when it comes to casinos, those who know that you always lose more than you win. Wealthy individuals who came specifically from Backland and the Intersea coast often lost everything except their pants. If you lost money, nothing would happen, of course. But if you won money, the problems would become much more complicated. Although they wouldn't stop you from leaving in person, that would ruin the casino's reputation. But as soon as you walked out the casino door, whatever happened had nothing to do with the casino. After all, this was a maritime colony, and there was no shortage of pirates. Even in Byam, being robbed on the street was a perfectly reasonable thing. And the owner of this gold coin casino was a powerful gang leader with a deep background, who had an indescribable but vaguely existing connection with the big shot at the governor's mansion. What would happen after leaving the casino, those who know. But as long as there was no evidence to prove that the person who robbed you was related to the casino, then it was unrelated to the casino. You could only consider yourself unlucky. Of course, the casino's thugs, no matter how strong, couldn't be stronger than a demigod. At most, they would be sequence 6, which wouldn't even make Alger too fearful, let alone Ember, who could kill a demigod alone. The only problem was, this would cause them a lot of trouble and might delay them for a long time. But Alger stroked his chin. Since Ember didn't care, he certainly wouldn't advise against it. Making money by piggybacking was the right way. After all, he didn't have Ember's good luck. If he came to the casino alone, he would only lose everything, even his underwear. Let's go. Ember suddenly stood up and said casually. Alger raised an eyebrow, put away his chips, and followed Ember out, exchanging the chips for gold pounds at the window. In front of the large floor-to-ceiling window on the second floor of the casino, a bald man in a suit was looking at the two people exchanging chips at the window. And behind him, a subordinate, also in a suit, made a throat-slitting gesture and asked for instructions. "Boss, should we?" "Idiot." The bald man glanced at his subordinate and said angrily, "Tell the people below to let them go. I can afford to lose 10,000 gold pounds." In his casino, cheating was useless. Only truly lucky people could win money from him. And luck alone was far from enough. Because he had a magical item made from the extraordinary characteristics of a Sequence 5 winner from the Monster Pathway, which could bestow bad luck upon enemies. Winning a few hundred or 1,000 gold pounds, he wouldn't care. But if the other party won too much by luck, then don't blame him for also using a magical item. And being able to resist the influence of bad luck from his magical item meant that the other party was at least a Sequence 5 winner from the Monster Pathway. Rashly making an enemy of such a person for a mere 10,000 gold pounds was undoubtedly the stupidest act. What's more, the other party had only won a little over 10,000 gold pounds, which was already giving him enough face. He couldn't be ungrateful. "Yes, boss." The subordinate quickly lowered his head and agreed, but at the end, he said tremblingly, "There's one more thing, Silvercoin Viper, Adel has issued a commission to find a person wearing 10 strange rings." "Oh." The bald man's expression shifted slightly, showing surprise on his face, and he asked, "You found this person? Do you know what he looks like?" "Haven't found him yet." "Then what the hell are you talking about? We do legitimate business. Don't do such despicable things like backstabbing people. Also, stay away from people like him in the future. ... Understood. But you have to keep looking for him, just don't tell Adel, got it? Also, find out who asked Adel to look for him." "Understood." His subordinate lowered his head, his expression a little strange. Asking him to look for someone but not tell Adel, wasn't that just waiting for a better price? Also, although Adel often provided some half-true, half-false information, he was still an information peddler after all. Backstabbing people, wasn't that something you, boss, often did? ... No one came to cause trouble. Alger, far from the casino, turned back to look at the empty street, his face full of surprise. "That's not necessary." Ember glanced at Alger and said, "It's only 10,000 gold pounds. Someone who can afford such a large casino wouldn't make a big fuss over such a small amount of money." Just, small amount. Alger's face twitched, but when he thought of Ember's strength, perhaps this was really just a small amount of money to him. Alger shook his head, although Ember had already displayed sufficient strength. But his perception hadn't completely changed yet, and he wasn't quite used to it. After all, he himself was only a sequence 6. Although the required extraordinary materials were already in hand, his potion digestion progress wasn't that fast. But it was alright. Although his luck wasn't great, he also made a small profit by betting with Ember this time. So, this round wasn't a loss. The next morning, at Sharf's mansion, a knock on the door startled Sharf, making his body tremble. In the end, he gritted his teeth and walked to the door to open it. "It's you." Sharf, covered in sweat, opened the door and forced a smile when he saw the two of them. "Why are you sweating so much?" Alger suddenly frowned and asked. Sharf's expression froze, and he gave a wry smile. "Do you think mystical items are that easy to modify? Let alone me, even if it were you working all night with your nerves taut, you'd be the same as me. Where are the items?" Alger shook his head and asked again. "They're on the table." Sharf, who hadn't slept all night, wiped his sweat, revealing a somewhat tired expression, and pointed to the table in the living room. Ember glanced at it. The Concerto of Light and Shadow, originally a tin pocket watch, had been modified into a golden wristwatch. The lucky clover had been made into a necklace, and the 4-leaf clover inside was also concealed, making it impossible to recognize its original shape. The iron black glove had its palm part removed and turned into a bracer. As for Rivera's desperate howl, the modification was the biggest, changing from its original rugged appearance with 6 thick barrels into a seemingly ordinary revolver. "What's going on?" Alger frowned and asked. "Isn't this barely modified?" "There wasn't enough time." Sharf immediately complained bitterly. "You only came to me yesterday. Even if I worked overtime all night, it would be impossible to modify them this quickly, let alone the fact that these mystical items are of such high grade. This is only because it's me. If it were someone else, getting even one done for you would be good." Although Ember didn't have high demands, only asking him to slightly change the appearance. But these are mystical items after all. Even just changing the appearance, a slight carelessness could lead to damage. Coupled with the short time, Sharf could only make some minor changes to the appearance. For example, changing a pocket watch into a wristwatch, and a talisman into a necklace. But even so, he had to be careful to avoid damaging their core extraordinary characteristics. If he wanted to completely change the shape, like changing that wristwatch directly into a necklace or a ring, it wasn't impossible for him. But the workload involved was immense, requiring a lot of time, and one night certainly wasn't enough. The other 3 items were fine, only requiring minor modifications based on their original form. So most of his time last night was spent modifying Rivera's desperate howl. This was what caused this mystical item to change its appearance so much. "Never mind, this is fine." Compared to Alger's dissatisfaction, Ember didn't care at all and waved his hand, saying, "As long as people can't recognize their original appearance, it's fine." Sharf couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief upon hearing this. He wasn't too worried about Alger. After all, they had known each other for so long, he wouldn't go too far. He was only afraid that Ember would vent his anger on him. And the wrath of a demigod was something he couldn't bear. "Let's go." Ember walked to the table, made a grasping motion in the air with his hand, and collected all 4 mystical items into his soul space. Sharf watched silently the entire time until the two turned and left, disappearing at the end of the street. And when the figures of the two completely disappeared, Sharf's highly taut nerves finally relaxed slightly. It was only after he finally came back to his senses that he realized his back was already completely soaked with sweat. Sweat beads were also continuously seeping from his forehead. It looked like he was tired, but in fact, he was scared. Because there was still one thing he hadn't told those two. He indeed hadn't slept all night, constantly busy helping the other party modify mystical items. But in fact, someone had come to find him in the middle. The other party was also an old acquaintance who had asked him to create many mystical items. And the other party's question was very simple, asking if he had seen a person wearing 10 rings. Because according to the other party's guess, those 10 rings should all be mystical items. Some of them might even have been made by Sharf. Sharf had certainly seen him. Right in his house. But did he dare to say it? No. That was a demigod. He didn't dare to reveal information to the person who came to ask because he was afraid of retaliation afterward. But he also didn't dare to tell Ember and the other person about this experience because he was afraid they would silence him. He has a problem. At the corner of the street, Alger looked at Sharf's mansion and said in a deep voice, his reaction wasn't this big when he saw us yesterday. Now he suddenly looks afraid of seeing us. Either he accidentally damaged your items, or someone is asking him for information about us. The former is naturally impossible, the mystical items are all in Ember's hands. He would have already discovered any problems. Then it's likely the second possibility. Alger hesitated slightly and whispered, he probably wouldn't dare to inform, but just in case, should we? No need. Ember glanced at Alger, pondered for a moment, then shook his head and said, whether he informs or not doesn't matter at all. He's not the only one who saw us arrive. However, this is indeed a trouble. Let's leave as soon as possible. Okay. Alger nodded, and couldn't help but feel relieved in his heart. Sharf and he had known each other for a long time, so it was good to be able to save his life. However, Alger knew that Ember was afraid of trouble. And coincidentally, he was also afraid of trouble. After all, it was obvious at a glance that those people were definitely looking for Ember, and they were likely from the force that the killed demigod belonged to, most likely the Rune royal family. Ember could just pack up and return to Backland, but he still had to make a living at sea. So he was more inclined to actively avoid trouble rather than waiting for trouble to come knocking. However, plans often couldn't keep up with changes. Although Alger was familiar with Byam, although they had tried their best to avoid crowded places, and although they had tried their best to reach the port in the shortest possible time. But when they arrived at the port, they found that the originally somewhat lively port was empty. There was only one figure on the dock next to the Azure Avenger, a bald man in a suit. It seemed he was tired of standing, as he was squatting on the ground in a very casual posture. His legs were spread out in an outward stance, his hands resting on his thighs, and he was looking up at the two of them with squinted eyes. He's not here for good intentions. Alger secretly raised his guard and subtly touched the ring on his hand. That was the mystical item he had just obtained from Sharf yesterday, Whip of Mind. Be careful. Alger whispered, remember the gold coin casino yesterday. He's the boss of that casino. He recognized the person before him, or rather, he had seen him from a distance once. So he recognized the other party immediately and determined that the other party was not here with good intentions. But what puzzled him was, why was he the only one here? As the boss of the gold coin casino, the other party had a large number of thugs under his command. Do you know? The bald man watched the two approach and suddenly said leisurely, this world is very interesting. For example, there's something called the law of extraordinary characteristics convergence. Simply put, high-sequence items of the same pathway and similar pathways will intermittently and unconsciously attract low- and mid-sequence extraordinary to their vicinity, and have a tendency to converge with each other. Low-sequence are unaware of this attraction, while high-sequence can perceive it. Now it seems this law also applies to us foreigners. Of course, this is not strange, after all, you're famous. However, the bald man paused, then suddenly revealed a brilliant smile, it seems I'm among the first to discover you. Alger's expression was strange. When they first met, he thought this person should be very serious. But why did his voice sound so lewd? Ember expressionlessly stared at the familiar man before him, while the bald man waved his hand and said, don't look at me like that. I won't be kneeling on the ground this time. We've long since put those minor grudges behind us, haven't we? Ember gave no comment to the bald man's words, just nodded slightly, then silently took out the Irithil straight sword. But after thinking about it, he swapped the Irithil straight sword for the Astora greatsword. Wait. The bald man's expression changed slightly, and he quickly said, I'm not here to fight you, at least not now. At least wait until you and Jay. Wait for what? Ember frowned slightly. Although he still hadn't put away his weapon, his movement stopped. Tisk. The bald man clicked his tongue, it seems you were indeed burned quite badly by the fire. Your memory loss is quite severe. I have indeed forgotten many things. Ember raised his greatsword and pointed it at the bald man, saying slowly, but at least, I should never forget you for the rest of my life, Patch. Then I'm truly honored. The bald man, or rather, Patch, had a rather strange expression and said helplessly, but no matter what, I don't think I'll have another chance to backstab you in the future, so there's no need for you to be so hostile towards me, right? Ember remained expressionless, just walking towards Patch step by step. Hey. There's no need to make it like this, right? No way. We just met, and you want to kill me again. Again. Don't you want to know what happened? Patch realized something was wrong, and his voice became increasingly urgent and rapid. And when Ember heard his last sentence, he stopped his steps and nodded slightly at him. Continue. Chapter 106, I am the indomitable Patch. Quote. Patch was a bit speechless and could only follow the topic. What I can tell you is very limited. After you extinguished the fire, usurped the fire, the world fell into darkness. But fortunately, most people successfully transferred to the painting world, waiting for the day the world would be bright again. Well, if there is such a day. Patch shrugged, saying indifferently, anyway, I didn't see it, but I don't care either. I don't think I would invite you. Ember glanced at Patch and said flatly. Although he had no relevant memories, even if he invited a dog into the painting world, he would never invite Patch. Indeed. Patch nodded, saying with a serious face, I don't think you would invite me either, and I am indeed very sad that I didn't receive your invitation. Patch changed the subject and chuckled, so I chose to act myself and sneak in. And you saw what happened. Patch spread his hands and sighed, I was kicked out and never managed to get back in. Everyone rejected me, as if I had offended them before. But it is also because of this reason that I have no idea about the situation inside the painting world now. Patch complained while muttering, you really should manage them properly. After all, I'm your good brother, right? You are their king, so I should at least be considered a prince, right? To actually sweep me, this prince, out the door. Patch's voice stopped abruptly because the greatsword was already resting on his neck. All right, I won't say anything. Patch shrank his neck very obediently. Ember didn't chop down directly because he planned to ask a few more questions. Were you the one inquiring about our whereabouts? Yes, and no. Even with the sword at his neck, Patch still had a mischievous look, chuckling, I just heard someone was looking for you, so I just happened to look for you as well. As for the group of people who first looked for you, it was Owl, the Silver Coin Viper. And the person behind him, most likely, is from the Rose School. But don't worry, I didn't tell Owl your information. Also, Patch paused, then suddenly pulled out a rusty gold coin and threw it to Ember. Slap. Ember held the sword in one hand and caught the rusty gold coin with the other. Open black lens bracket, an ancient gold coin with rust spots. When crushed, it can temporarily greatly enhance treasure hunting ability. Those who lose wealth will one day encounter greater wealth. If so, isn't it better to lose more? Close black lens bracket. Can you let me go now? Patch looked at Ember with a sincere face. Seeing that Ember was unmoved, he changed his expression and threatened, if you don't agree, I'll kneel down. Quote. Alger was originally confused by the conversation between the two, but when he heard the last sentence Patch said with a fierce look, he almost couldn't help but burst out laughing. But upon hearing that, Ember suddenly put away his weapon and walked past him towards the Azure Avenger. Seeing this, Alger immediately followed, and at the same time began to communicate with the Azure Avenger. He made the ghost ship start moving. Soon, the anchor was tightened with the friction of the chains, and the white sails automatically unfurled without anyone controlling them. Blown by the wind, the Azure Avenger slowly sailed away from the harbor with its two passengers. And Patch was still squatting at the harbor, squinting his eyes at the distant ghost ship. I am a very simple person, unrestrained. There is nothing to gain, and nothing to lose, that's why I can live until now. But you, I have seen people like you, time and time again. You want to save everyone, how pathetic, you can't even save yourself. The more you help, the more you lose. Do you stake everything for honor? Or sacrifice all that you have? I can never understand what drives you. Is it the thirst for knowledge? A sacred mission? Or pure revenge? No matter what, you are shouldering a mission beyond your capabilities. After passing all the trials, you realize, you are ultimately qualified. Even the gods despair and shirk responsibility. The first fire is about to extinguish, and the abyss has seized your courage. You tightly hold the burning ember in your hand, facing the end, and always believe in yourself even when deceived. There is only one thing I don't understand. Why? Forget it. He shook his head, his tone incredibly relaxed, that's not what I care about. He was just an ordinary undead. Whether it was transferring fire or usurping the fire, whether it was schemes or tricks, or confronting the gods. None of this ultimately had anything to do with him. He was ultimately just an outsider. Just like how he was eventually discovered and expelled even if he was lucky enough to enter the painting world. Seriously, wasn't it supposed to be a hometown that accommodates the taboo and those who have lost everything? Didn't they say this was the last sanctuary? Does he, the magnificent Patch, not even have the qualification to be an aboriginal? Damn it. Patch cursed inwardly with indignation. Boss, what should we do next? Not long after the Azure Avenger left the harbor, a figure in a black trench coat quietly appeared behind Patch and asked respectfully. Patch suddenly turned his head and said leisurely, go and inform Owl, tell him that we have found the person wearing 10 rings. The person behind him was surprised, and said with a strange expression, didn't you, boss, tell us not to inform Owl? Patch had come to meet the person secretly from Owl and the others. He originally thought he should cover for the other party and prevent them from being tracked by Audel and the people behind him, but who would have thought Patch would say something like that? I changed my mind. Patch stood up and chuckled. Who am I? I am the indomitable Patch. I thought you were friends. Friends. I guess so, but that doesn't stop me from doing anything, does it? Patch paused, but just shrugged, saying leisurely. No matter how the dynasties change, human desires remain the same. This is really hard for me, who has no desires, to understand. Anything you want to ask? On the deck of the Azure Avenger, Ember suddenly asked. No, just. Alger shook his head. I thought you were friends. Friends. Ember shook his head expressionlessly. To be friends with him, you have to be careful that you might be tricked by him at any time. I'll give you a piece of advice, never trust Patch. You don't believe what he just told you either. Alger was slightly surprised, and said with a strange expression. Of course. Ember said calmly, be careful, the journey ahead may not be peaceful. Saying that, Ember suddenly tossed a gold coin to Alger. Alger reached out to catch it, and upon closer inspection, he found that the gold coin was very old. Not only was the surface covered with a large amount of rust spots, but even the rounded edges had a lot of dents, making it look extremely shabby. On the surface of the gold coin was a female figure with a blurry face and wings on her back. Alger almost instantly found the corresponding image. Angel. From the perspective of the extraordinary of sequence 2 or above are called angels. Alger had never seen a real angel, but he intuitively felt that these angels should look no different from ordinary people. After all, they ascended step by step from low sequences. There is no reason why they would suddenly grow wings on their back and become another race at sequence 2, right? Of course, in the scriptures of various religions, angels serving the gods always have this appearance. And some even have more than one pair of wings, and the highest-ranking angels even have 12 pairs of wings. To ordinary people, these angels are the incarnations of the gods. They believe in their existence deeply and are extremely devout. And although Alger was skeptical about the authenticity of these religious scriptures, he had no doubt about the strength of the angels. In any case, angels are the absolute symbol of strength within major religions. And at the moment, the gold coin Ember threw to him, although it looked ordinary. But Alger intuitively felt that it was definitely not that simple. This thing. Alger hesitated. It's for you. Ember waved his hand and said, crush it when you need it, it can temporarily greatly increase your luck. Rusty coins, rusty gold coins, he had too many of these things. They couldn't even fit in his soul space. A one-time use magical item. Or rather, some kind of charm. Alger was a little surprised. Only the monster sequence could increase luck. And at least sequence 7, or even possibly sequence 5. To just give away such an important item. Moreover, according to his understanding of Ember. After all, most of the other party's magical items had no side effects. Those with side effects were also spoils of war. At the same time, Alger became more and more curious about Ember's identity. What is the identity of Mr. Lover? From his conversation with the person named Patch, they should have known each other for a long time. And Patch seems to be from the painting world, but was driven out by the controller of the painting world. Moreover, he seems to have the characteristic of undead. Because he seems to have been killed by Lover many times. So this is why Lover disdained the sacrifice ring. Because he can't die anyway. But what sequence ability is this? What sequence can have the ability to be undead? This is no longer the domain of mortals, even ordinary demigods can't do it. Otherwise, there wouldn't be fallen demigods. But no matter what, even for high sequence extraordinary, immortality is too exaggerated, isn't it? Also, how much does Mr. Fool know about Lover? Mr. Fool should know a lot. He invited Lover to join the Tarot Club because of his special nature. Quote. Alger had many questions in his heart, and he really wanted to ask for clarification. But he always knew his limits and knew that asking rashly would only make him extremely awkward. After all, Ember had no obligation to answer his questions. Forget it. Alger shook his head and threw these distracting thoughts out of his mind. If Ember wanted him to know, he would have told him long ago. Since the other party didn't say anything, he didn't need to keep dwelling on it. Instead of thinking about these impossible questions, it was better to think more about the current situation. Ember said that Patch was untrustworthy, which meant that he would betray the two of them. Although he didn't understand why Ember didn't kill him. But these were not questions he should consider. What he should think about was the consequences of being betrayed. And if what Patch said was true, that it was Audel, the Silver Coin Viper, who was investigating them. Then, who hired the Silver Coin Viper to investigate? Could it really be the Rose School, as Patch said? Alger's eyes flickered. He knew Audel, the Silver Coin Viper, a famous intelligence dealer. He had dealings with a large number of pirates, but he himself was not a pirate. He had never been on a bounty list, and his bounty was still 0. Although the Silver Coin Viper claimed to be the owner of the Dawn and served the mysterious queen, one of the kings of the 5 seas, this could only deceive fools. Anyone who knew him would know that such an intelligence dealer could not only serve one person. What's more, Alger felt that they shouldn't have much interaction with the mysterious queen. The most likely possibility is the Rune royal family. But that doesn't make sense either. Although the Rothschild Islands are just a colony, they are still under the control of the Ruined Kingdom. If they were looking for someone, they could have done it themselves. And if it wasn't the Ruined Kingdom, if it was really the Rose School. But what did they want Ember for? They only arrived in Byam yesterday, so they shouldn't have any interaction with the Rose School. However, no matter what, it's always right to be careful. City of Generosity, Byam. In a villa not far from the governor's mansion. Silver Coin Viper, Audel walked up the stairs and cautiously came to a bedroom on the 2nd floor. His body trembled slightly as he knocked on the door, and his voice was unsteady as he said, "Senor, I may have information about the person you're looking for." Bang! The bedroom door was quickly opened, and Senor, who was naked, appeared before him. And even though he was naked, Senor's attitude was still aggressive. "Where?" Senor completely disregarded the fact that this was Audel's home, and questioned him in a condescending tone. "He has already left Byam," Audel said, and then, afraid that Senor would misunderstand, he explained, "I just received the information. Someone saw the person wearing 10 rings at the harbor. But he hadn't seen the person's face clearly before the person left by boat." "Whose ship?" Senor asked in a deep voice. "I don't know." Audel looked a little nervous and quickly said, "That ship used white sails, it's hard to tell which faction it belongs to." "Useless." Senor's face was gloomy, and his light brown eyes coldly swept over Audel's face, making the famous adventurer involuntarily lower his head. Senor snorted coldly. But there was still a place where he needed Audel, so he didn't kill him. He just picked up the clothes scattered on the ground and walked downstairs while getting dressed. During this time, Audel stood still with his head down. Until Senor pushed open the door and completely disappeared from the villa. Audel silently breathed a sigh of relief, his gaze looking through the open door into the room. A woman with a graceful figure and exquisite face, but completely naked, was sleeping soundly on the bed. The bruises on her body indicated that she had been tormented quite a bit last night. A peculiar heather scent filled the room, and the woman's face still bore a satisfied, happy smile. This woman was Audel's mistress, Vivian. But it was not Audel who spent the night with her. A flash of anger flickered in Audel's eyes. He turned and walked into the room, closing the door behind him. "Bitch. I can't deal with him, but I can't deal with you." Sonia Sea, north of the Gargaz archipelago. A sailboat, tens of meters long, clean and tidy, reflecting a golden color in the sun, was riding the wind and waves, breaking out of the dangerous waters and entering the nearby safe shipping lane. And when the people on the ship noticed the land looming in the distance, they couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. After nearly 10 days of sailing, they were finally about to reach Sunia Island. To avoid possible searches by the Ruined Kingdom, they didn't even dare to take the safe shipping lane. Instead, they traveled through violent and dangerous waters all the way, just to reach Sunia Island as discreetly as possible. Although the Ruined Kingdom might not necessarily cause them trouble. But it's always right to be careful. As long as we can reach Sunia Island, the Ruined Kingdom's lackeys won't dare to come and trouble us. Ha 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 ha, Ruined Kingdom, that's all there is to it. Danitz seemed to be relieved, standing on the deck at the bow of the ship and laughing loudly. And the surrounding sailors seemed to have become accustomed to it and ignored his crazy behavior. What's more, their mood at this time was not much different from Danitz's. Before, in order to avoid the possible pursuit of the Ruined Kingdom, they had been on tenterhooks for a long time. Speaking of which, it seems like the captain hasn't come out for a long time. First mate Orpheus stroked his chin and asked strangely, "Nothing happened, right?" "I'll go take a look." Third mate, Flower Bow Tie, looked slightly moved and immediately said, "Get lost." First mate Bruce and first mate Orpheus said in unison, and Orpheus also kicked him by the way. Meanwhile, in the captain's cabin of the Golden Dream, the beautiful lady with an oval face, a high nose bridge, and thin lips, now had a face full of tangled emotions. Her light blue eyes, which were originally as clear as spring water, were also filled with embarrassment. Just after entering the safe shipping lane today, she received both good news and bad news. The good news is, Teacher Klana replied to her letter, which means Teacher Klana has awakened from her long slumber. This is a good thing. The bad news is, Teacher Klana instructed her in the letter to be sure to bring the ash black she found back to Leuenberg. Teacher Klana even specifically mentioned that they absolutely must not pass through the sphere of influence of the Ruined Kingdom. Don't go through the Sonia Sea, and don't go through the Violent Sea. They should go through the North Sea, pass through the Fursak Empire, detour to the Misty Sea, and then return to Leuenberg. But the problem is there a possibility, and I mean a possibility. Ash Black had already disembarked at Toscat Island 10 days ago. Quote. The lady's beautiful face was full of entanglement. She had no idea how to handle this situation. Bang bang bang. Just then, there was a knock on the captain's cabin door. Edwina hesitated for a long time, but finally got up and went to the door and opened it. Bang. The moment the door opened, 3 figures stumbled into the captain's cabin. But Edwina seemed to have been prepared and skillfully dodged, so she wasn't hit head-on by the 3 of them. Captain. The 3 mates' expressions were a little awkward as they greeted her with a smile. Bruce. Edwina looked at the 3 of them and instructed them, tell the sailors to change course, we're not going to Sunia Island. Not going to Sunia Island. Then where are we going? Bruce looked surprised and asked strangely. Edwina was silent for a moment, then her red lips parted and she uttered a word. Pritz Harbor. Hiss. The 3 mates gasped simultaneously, and, Flower Bow Tie, said in disbelief, Captain, did you say that wrong? Even without that incident, we are still wanted criminals in the Ruined Kingdom. The bounty for everyone on the ship combined must be at least 100,000 pounds, right? Yes, Captain. Isn't going to Pritz Harbor walking into a trap. Captain, do you want to reconsider? Tell the sailors, those who don't want to go can get off the ship now. Edwina, who usually respected the crew's wishes, seemed particularly firm at this moment and said resolutely, it's not far from Sunia Island here, and you can reach it by small boat. But the Golden Dream is my ship, and it must go to Pritz Harbor. The 3 mates exchanged glances, knowing that the captain would definitely not listen to advice at this time. Shall we use the excuse of going to participate in the pirate convention? First mate Bruce hesitated and suggested. No. Edwina shook her head lightly, tell them the truth. Bruce hesitated to speak but chose to remain silent. Because he knew that the captain had always had this personality. Okay, I'll go inform them now, but I won't get off the ship. Orpheus took a deep breath and said in a deep voice. After speaking, he turned and left, preparing to inform the sailors. Although, Flower Bow Tie had a tangled expression at the moment, he didn't say he was leaving either. He just sighed helplessly and also turned and walked out of the captain's cabin. Edwina looked at the backs of the 3 mates, her delicate face carrying a hint of worry. Although the Sonia Sea belongs to the Fursak Empire, it is in fact extremely far from the capital of the Fursak Empire. This island was originally occupied by the Ruined Kingdom, but it was only after the Ruined Kingdom suffered a disastrous defeat in the 20 Years' War that they had to hand over Sunia Island to the Fursak Empire. Therefore, the distance between Sunia Island and the capital of the Ruined Kingdom is much closer than the distance to the capital of the Fursak Empire. The closest point on Sunia Island to the Ruined Kingdom is even less than a day's sail. And if you want to go from Sunia Island to Pritz Harbor in the Ruined Kingdom, the closest place only takes less than 4 days. From their current location, it would probably take less than a week. And it would take Ember at least half a month to travel from Toscat Island to Pritz Harbor. And if the ship stopped for supplies in places like Byam along the way, it would delay a few more days. And counting the time they spent coming to the Sonia Sea after separating from Ember, it's about 18 days. In other words, if they leave now, there is still hope of intercepting the other party before Pritz Harbor. There should be enough time. Edwina murmured softly. Although Teacher has awakened, it is impossible for her to leave the painting world and come in person in her current state. And the headquarters of the Knowledge Church is in Leuenberg, and even if they sent someone now, it would take at least a month. So, only she has the chance to salvage all of this now. Phew, I hope we can make it. Backland, Hillston District, 117 Bonningham Road. Lover should be Ember, so could Justice be Miss Audrey. Shu sat on the side single sofa, seriously analyzing the information about the Tarot Club members. Furs, what do you think? Shu hesitated and looked towards Furs on the main sofa. Why think so much? Furs lay idly on the sofa, her voice as soft as if she hadn't eaten. It doesn't matter either way, do you still want to go and confront Miss Audrey face to face? I'm serious. Shu rolled her eyes at her and said irritably, aren't you a detective novelist? Help me analyze it. All right. Furs sighed lightly and sat up from the sofa. Her lazy demeanor instantly disappeared, and her face was filled with seriousness. If I were to analyze it. Furs thought seriously for a moment and said with certainty, Miss Justice is definitely Miss Audrey. After all, I only know Miss Audrey among the golden-haired noble misses. If you want other evidence. Furs paused, then continued, although, Justice, deliberately disguised herself, her voice is still extremely similar to Miss Audrey's. The most obvious is Bake Lang, the Intis Republic ambassador. You know, it was Miss Audrey who personally entrusted us to find Mr. A. This cannot be explained by coincidence. Although it is also possible that Miss Justice is actually a noble friend of another Miss Audrey, and it was she who asked Miss Audrey to entrust us to find Mr. A to assassinate the ambassador. But isn't that possibility very small? And if I'm not mistaken, Miss Justice should have been invited by Ember, just like us. But, Shu felt that Furz's words made sense, but she still asked with some doubt, the extraordinary materials Miss Justice bought at the Tarot Club cost £700 per unit, which is the price of Sequence 7 extraordinary materials. That is to say, she is at least a Sequence 8 extraordinary. But Miss Audrey has only been an extraordinary for a short time, probably less than a month. Fake. Furs rolled her eyes. It's very likely that Miss Audrey was already an extraordinary when we met her. The reason she still asked us to buy the audience potion was probably to hide the existence of the Tarot Club. Although this would cause her to spend an extra £200 to repurchase the potion, for Miss Audrey, this small amount of money is nothing at all. The more Zio listened, the more reasonable it sounded, but the more unsure she felt. She whispered, "Then should I continue to collect information on the impoverished nobles? The Zio I know would never be so timid." Furs looked at her friend's hesitant appearance and said somewhat helplessly, "Besides, the information you've collected might not even be as complete as Miss Audrey's. After all, she's a noble, and the information she has must be much more detailed than yours." That's not necessarily true. Hearing this, Zio was a little unconvinced. The kingdom doesn't pay much attention to these impoverished nobles, and the archives they can obtain only contain official statements. But my intelligence network can directly start with these impoverished nobles themselves. Perhaps it will be more detailed than the kingdom's own archives. Then go do it. Furs encouraged, what's there to be afraid of? Whether we can establish ourselves in the Tarot Club depends entirely on you, Zio. What about you? Zio asked back, somewhat speechless. What can I do? Furs said self-righteously, I don't have strong power like others, nor do I have abundant connections and an intelligence network in the East District like you, Zio. But don't worry, I'll cheer for you at home. Zio rolled her eyes, speechless at this lazy person. Backland, Queen's District, Earl Hall's family's luxurious villa. Information on impoverished nobles should be obtainable from the royal heraldry officials. Audrey sat on the piano stool, her hands on the keys but not playing, instead slightly lost in thought. Every noble has their own crest and family emblem, which are specially recorded by royal officials. Approaching those officials under the guise of studying history shouldn't arouse suspicion. However, Audrey was a little hesitant. Yesterday's Tarot Club revealed many things. She had thought about bringing Miss Furs and Miss Zio above the gray fog, but she didn't expect it to happen so quickly. They should have already realized that she is Justice. Well, Mr. Lover's identity should also have been exposed. But this is not necessarily a bad thing. Because in this way, excluding Mr. Fool, there are a total of 7 people in the Tarot Club. And the 4 of them can form a small group, which might give them a great advantage. Ah, Audrey. What are you thinking, Audrey? Audrey suddenly blushed and quickly shook her head, casting these distracting thoughts aside. The Tarot Club was established by Mr. Fool to provide them with convenience, and it was originally intended for everyone to help each other. How could she think about forming factions within the Tarot Club? Having such thoughts is truly inappropriate. To have such blasphemous thoughts, she must pray to the gods. Audrey thought, and suddenly hesitated again. Should she pray to Mr. Fool or to the goddess of the night? Silver City. Derek sat on the bed, his expression somewhat conflicted. On one hand, he obtained the Priest of Light potion formula from Mr. World. Coupled with the fact that his current potion was nearing digestion, he should be able to advance soon. So he was thinking of accumulating merit and rewards first to obtain the 2 main materials for the Priest of Light potion formula from the Silver City official or private trading market. According to the original plan, he should be able to obtain the main materials just as the potion is completely digested, thus seamlessly advancing to Sequence 8 Priest of Light. But on the other hand, Derek felt a little uneasy. After all, Mr. World had already given him the potion formula and additionally compensated him £150 to pay off his debt. But the Misty Tree route he promised would have to wait until he first advanced to Priest of Light. This made Derek feel a sense of guilt, like eating everything and then just giving a little money to dismiss the other party. That's why he was conflicted about whether to obtain the main materials for the Priest of Light first or to help Mr. World obtain the roots and sap of the Misty Tree first. Perhaps. Derek struggled for a while, then whispered with a hesitant expression, "Can I borrow a little from my friends first?" Miss Audrey's suggestion inspired him. He didn't have enough merit to obtain all the extraordinary materials, but if he could borrow from his friends, it should be enough. This way, he might be able to give Mr. World what he needs at the next Tarot Club. The Azure Avenger slowly sailed away from Byam and entered the vast sea. In the captain's cabin, Alger pointed to the unfolded map and said concisely, "We now have two paths. One is to go directly north, but there is a certain chance of being surrounded and intercepted. The other is to detour through the raging sea. This will add 4 or 5 days to the voyage, but it's safer. Then take the second one." Ember glanced at Alger and said casually, "It's better to be cautious." "Okay." Alger breathed a sigh of relief, as he was also planning to use the second route, first making a detour through the raging sea. The Sonia Sea is to the east of the North Continent and South Continent, while the raging sea is in the middle of the South Continent and North Continent, so these two oceans are actually connected. Even the southernmost island of the Rothschild Islands is less than a day's voyage from the raging sea. To get from the North Continent to the South Continent, going through the raging sea is undoubtedly the shortest route. But the raging sea has always been known for its numerous natural disasters and countless dangerous currents. If an ordinary ship accidentally enters it, it will likely end up with the ship destroyed and the crew lost. So most people would rather go through the Misty Sea to the west of the North and South continents, or the Sonia Sea to the east. Even pirates would not easily set foot in the waters of the raging sea, unless they have a safe route that can be navigated in the raging sea. Fortunately, Alger happens to have such a route. This is also the reason why he dared to take a detour through the raging sea. And even if someone is really chasing them, even if the person chasing them also happens to have a route that allows them to safely enter and exit the raging sea. But the route they have may not be the same as the route Alger has. Just as Rosal the Great said, "A miss is as good as a mile." Once they enter the raging sea, no one can catch up with them. Where are the people? On the Byam dock, Senor asked, suppressing his anger. "They just left an hour ago." The man in the black windbreaker glanced at Senor, took out his pocket watch, looked at it, and then slowly said, "If you go after them now, you should still be able to catch up." Senor's face was extremely gloomy, and he asked coldly, "What kind of ship did he take? Where did he go?" "I don't know," the windbreaker man said calmly. "It was just an ordinary sailboat, with white sails. How could I recognize what kind of ship it was? As for where he went, it should be Backland." "Are you sure?" Senor asked in a deep voice. Even if he didn't know about the other party's captain, knowing the other party's destination wasn't bad. At least there was still a chance to intercept the other party. This was a guidance from God, and he dared not be careless in any way. "Not sure." The windbreaker man shrugged, "I just guessed it. Believe it if you want, don't blame me if I guessed wrong." Senor's eyes were exceptionally cold, looking as if he wanted to devour someone. But the windbreaker man's expression remained exceptionally calm, as if he didn't feel Senor's surging killing intent at all. Senor's expression was extremely cold, but in the end, he still didn't choose to act. He just took a deep breath, turned around and boarded his flagship, and coldly ordered, "Set sail for Tiana Island, perhaps there is still a chance to intercept them." "Captain." First Mate Brucesteele, Mavity leaned forward and carefully said, "Is this information reliable? Should we ask others? There should be many people on this dock who saw the appearance of the divine messenger. Are you teaching me how to do things?" Senor glanced at him indifferently and said coldly, "I wouldn't dare." Mavity's body trembled violently, and he said in fear, "I'll go order the sailors to set sail now." Senor withdrew his gaze and looked at the windbreaker man on the dock who was smiling and waving at him, his eyes cold. Of course he knew he could ask others again. But he knew even better that he didn't have time. If the other party's destination was Backland, he had to intercept him before he reached Pritz Harbor. An hour had already been delayed. As long as the other party's ship wasn't too fast, there might still be hope of catching up. But if he delayed for a few more hours, it would only be more difficult to catch up with the other party. And by the time the other party reached Bansi Island or even Demir Island, his hope would only become increasingly slim. By then, even if God wouldn't punish him for this, Lord Jex would not let him off. So he could only make the best of it and first search along the route to Backland. Even if he still couldn't catch up with the person by then, or if he had simply gone in the wrong direction from the beginning and the other party was not actually going to Backland, there was still room for remedy. Because he could completely say it was Audle's problem. It was Audle who gave false information, causing him to make a mistake. But no matter how he chose, it was better than staying put and waiting foolishly. Didn't he know that it would be better to wait for more accurate information from the investigation before setting off? But that was impossible. Senor knew the nature of the Windbreaker man and the people behind him very well, because this was not the first time they had cooperated. Since the other party dared to sell information to him, they would definitely ensure that it was exclusive information. Even if it wasn't originally, it was now. Even if someone had seen that ship, or even remembered its appearance, they must have been dealt with cleanly by him and the people behind him. In this situation, even if he stayed at the dock and investigated for another day, there would be no clues. So he chose to leave. First, search along the main route, and during this time, send people to investigate secretly. After all, although he left, Audel was still in Byam. Audel's intelligence network would continue to track the whereabouts of the Divine Messenger and promptly notify him of the information via radio. By then, if the route was wrong, he could adjust in time. Because this is Byam, if the other party is not going to Backland, they can only go deep into the Sonia Sea or the Raging Sea. Whichever it is, he has plenty of time to adjust. Chapter 107 I can't wait to tell that bitch Anderson about this. Chapter 107 I can't wait to tell that bastard Anderson about this. The Furious Sea. On a sea filled with natural disasters and treacherous currents. A sailboat with white sails was sailing through it. It was Alger's Azure Avenger. On the Furious Sea, without an accurate nautical chart, even the most experienced navigators would lose their way. While losing your way in the Sonia Sea would at most mean getting lost, losing your way in the Furious Sea often meant death. So even if there were really pursuers behind them, even if the other party knew they would head to the Furious Sea, facing the turbulent and dangerous Furious Sea, they, unprepared, could only flinch. However, this way, the original plan was to arrive at Pritz Harbor within 10 days, but now it would add nearly another week. Therefore, it wasn't until the last day of September, September 30th, that the Azure Avenger, after 5 days of sailing, finally passed through the turbulent Furious Sea and successfully reached Midcourse Island. But just before sailing into the Midcourse Island port, the Azure Avenger suddenly turned north. After all, they were just taking a detour, not actually going to Midcourse Island. The reason for approaching Midcourse Island was just to ensure they remained in a safe channel and didn't deviate from their course. There are two options next. In the captain's cabin, Alger spread the map on the table and explained, either head northwest to Dissy Bay, which will take about 2 days. Once we reach Dissy Bay, continue north for about 2 days to reach Connaught. At that time, you can take a steam train there to Backland. Or, continue north, and you can reach Demir Island in about 4 days. Although it is also a colony of the Ruined Kingdom, unlike the Rothschild Islands, Demir Island is already the traditional sphere of influence of the Ruined Kingdom Navy, with a large number of naval warships patrolling. Even pirate generals dare not challenge the Ruined Kingdom in such a place. However, after reaching Demir Island, it will still take 3 days to go north to Pritz Harbor. And purely from a time perspective, the two options are actually quite similar. Let's go to Demir Island. Ember pondered for 2 seconds and said. His intuition told him that if he went to Dissy Bay now, this journey might encounter even greater twists and turns and accidents again. That would only further delay his return to Backland. So, it would be better to go to Demir Island. Anyway, once they reached Demir Island, it was the traditional sphere of influence of the Ruined Kingdom, so the pirates couldn't possibly dare to chase them here, right? Okay. Alger nodded lightly. Since Ember had made his decision, he certainly wouldn't say anything more. On the Sonia Sea, near Demir Island, a sailboat several dozen meters long, emitting a golden color under the sunlight, was cutting through the waves. However, compared to before, there were significantly fewer sailors on the deck. Those guys are really useless. Danitz stood by the side of the ship and complained to Daniels, who had a pot belly. They abandoned the captain just because of such a small matter. It's only because the captain is merciful. Anyone else would have thrown them into the sea to feed the fish long ago. That's right. Daniels agreed, the captain shouldn't have let them disembark. There might be spies from other forces among these people, and letting them disembark will only sell us out. And, Flower Bow Tie, he usually looks decent, but he ran away at the critical moment. A few days ago, when the captain made the decision to head west, a commotion broke out on the ship almost immediately. And when the captain suggested they could decide whether to stay or leave on their own, nearly half of the sailors chose to leave. And among them, even, Flower Bow Tie, Yodson, who was the third mate, was included. Tui. Danitz spat into the sea and sneered, I knew this scoundrel was unreliable from the start. He kept saying he wanted to win the captain's heart, how about it? At the critical moment, he showed his true colors, didn't he? I'm the one she can rely on. Tui, you scoundrel, I think you're just a toad trying to eat swan meat. Both of you, say less. First mate Bruce, who was passing by, frowned slightly and warned. But he didn't scold them, he just turned around and walked towards the captain's cabin. Captain. In the captain's cabin, second mate Orpheus earnestly persuaded, isn't that enough? This is already Demir Island, the closest colonial island to the Ruined Kingdom. If we really go to Pritz Harbor, the Ruined Kingdom might misunderstand that we are going to rob Backland. That would probably be no different from seeking death. Edwina did not answer, looking at the map on the table in silence. She also knew how dangerous her current actions were, akin to dancing on the tip of a knife. However, although it seemed very dangerous, it was not irreversible. The Ruined Kingdom knew very well that pirate generals each had their own forces behind them, and under normal circumstances, they would turn a blind eye. It's fine just being in the waters near Demir Island, but if they really got close to Pritz Harbor, even the name of the Church of Knowledge wouldn't be able to protect her. But she had a reason to do so. Bruce. Edwina raised her head, looking at the first mate who pushed the door open with her clear blue eyes, and said softly, send someone to Demir Island to gather intelligence, go to the port and ask if anyone wearing 10 rings has appeared recently. Okay. Bruce nodded solemnly and quickly went out to instruct the sailors on deck to start acting. Soon, a small boat carrying several sailors sailed towards Demir Island. However, not long after, a small boat suddenly returned. After pulling the people from the small boat onto the ship, Bruce immediately frowned. Danitz, why are you back so soon? I received a message. Danitz didn't dare to delay, swallowed a mouthful of saliva, and quickly said, Blood Admiral, Senor is looking for someone wearing 10 rings. I'll go notify the captain. Bruce's expression changed drastically, and he immediately prepared to go to the captain's cabin to inform Edwina. No need, I already know. The clear voice of a lady came from behind. Bruce turned around and found that Edwina had appeared on the deck at some point. Do you know why they are looking for this person? Edwina looked at Danitz and asked. I don't know. Danitz shook his head and explained, not only on Demir Island, but, Blood Admiral, people have been offering rewards for someone wearing 10 rings on all the surrounding islands recently. But from the current situation, he probably hasn't found them yet. Where is Senor's ship? Edwina was silent, and after a long time, she suddenly asked. The surrounding sailors' expressions changed slightly, and Bruce couldn't help but say, Captain, you don't mean to go to war with Blood Admiral, do you? No, Edwina said calmly, I just want to bring the person back. But if Blood Admiral wanted to obstruct her, then she had no other choice. Backland, Crag Club. Klein put on his double-breasted frock coat and picked up his half-height silk hat. Having accepted the commission from reporter Mike Joseph, he was preparing to accompany him on an investigation. But just as he reached the door, he suddenly heard layers of ethereal prayers echoing. Someone is praying to me. Klein immediately had a feeling and said apologetically to Mike behind him, sorry, I need to go to the washroom first. Please do. Mike shrugged and turned back to sit on the sofa. And Klein immediately got up and walked towards the washroom neither fast nor slow. Closing the door, Klein expertly walked 4 steps counterclockwise and entered the pool. The prayer came from Miss the Judgment. The petite girl was sitting on the sofa, bowing her head and praying devoutly. I have collected the information on the fallen nobles, and I request to hold a sacrificial ritual. Please transfer it to Mr. World. A few days slower than Miss Justice, but still very fast. Although he already had the information given by Miss Justice, Klein was still a little surprised. He already understood Miss Justice's channel. She went directly to the royal family's archives. With her Sequence 8 mind reader's memory, she could basically remember all the information after just one look. And Miss the Judgment obviously didn't have such a convenient channel as Miss Justice. She relied entirely on her own intelligence network to inquire. But being able to complete the commission within a week was already quite outstanding. Soon, Hugh, a little unfamiliar, performed her first sacrificial ritual in her life, throwing the information she had collected and compiled into that ethereal door. I will transfer it to World. Klein cut off the connection with an indifferent tone. He didn't look through the pile of information, but quickly returned to reality. Firstly, he had already seen Miss Justice's information before and had obtained the information he wanted. This caused him to be temporarily uninterested in the intelligence collected by the Judgment. It was not too late to look at it when he went to bed at night. Secondly, Mike was still waiting for him outside, and he couldn't delay in the washroom for too long. Sorry to keep you waiting. Klein walked out of the washroom and said apologetically to Mike on the sofa, let's go. Okay. Mike smiled and nodded, getting up to leave. Snap. Klein held the doorknob and pushed open the club's door, one foot just stepping out of the door. The next moment, he suddenly stopped. Because, once again, he heard layers of ethereal prayers. Quote. Klein fell silent, turned back to look at Mike with a pained expression, covering his stomach, and said, "Sorry, I think I need to go to the washroom again." "Go ahead." Mike looked at Klein with a strange expression. He saw that the other party was pretending, but he didn't expose him. He just silently walked back to the sofa and sat down again. This time, Klein quickly rushed into the washroom, walked 4 steps counterclockwise, and entered the Fool. This time, it was the sun praying. "Mr. Fool, I have prepared the true root and juice of the misty treant. Please transfer them to Mr. World." So fast. Klein was a little surprised. Because last time, the sun said he would have to wait until he was promoted to Sequence 8 to obtain these things, but the sun obviously hadn't completed the promotion yet, so where did these things come from? But before he could think carefully, Thiessen, Derek sacrificed the items. The true root of the misty treant was heart-shaped, brown, and palm-sized. The front was wrinkled, like the skin of an old man, while the back was smooth and delicate, like a gemstone. It was slightly expanding and contracting, as if it still had some vitality. Its juice was light green and crystal clear, looking very delicious. Klein looked at them like that, and he was actually a little ambitious. Because in this era, Sequence 7 was the threshold of the middle sequences. This meant that Extraordinary finally bid farewell to the state of being only slightly stronger than ordinary people in certain aspects and would possess relatively rich extraordinary abilities. Klein was hesitant for a moment. Now he had all the extraordinary materials needed for his promotion to Sequence 7, and he really wanted to concoct the potion now. But he had promised Mike that he would accompany him on the investigation after all. Let's wait until the evening. Klein hesitated for a moment and finally decided to complete the commission first. He quickly returned to reality and walked out of the washroom to see Mike waiting in the living room. "Sorry." Klein apologized again, "There shouldn't be any more accidents this time, let's go." "Mr. Sherlock." This time, Mike didn't get up, but said with some hesitation, "You seem a little off today. Do you want to postpone for a while?" After a pause, Mike explained, "Actually, although I do hope to conduct the investigation as soon as possible, I'm not in that much of a hurry." "Well, don't worry, I won't look for anyone else." In Mike's opinion, Klein's 2 trips to the restroom in a short period of time were likely due to a physical issue. He didn't want the other party to go to the restroom during the mission. That would not only waste time, but the other party would probably not be able to take on the task of protecting him well. Mr. Mike is such a good person. Klein was startled at first, and then he couldn't help but feel a little emotional. Facing Mike's generosity, Klein didn't refuse, but just said with a bitter smile, "You're making fun of me. I'm probably like this because I ate something expired." "No, it's okay." Mike smiled understandingly, "Everyone has accidents. How about we meet here tomorrow noon and continue the investigation after that?" "Noon," Klein said helplessly, "I have other things to deal with tomorrow afternoon." "How about tonight?" Tomorrow is October 1st, Monday. He has to attend the tarot club in the afternoon, so there definitely won't be enough time. "Of course, evening is better." Mike hesitated, "But your body?" "Don't worry, an afternoon is enough for me to recover," Klein said immediately. He is also quite familiar with concocting potions. An afternoon is enough for him to concoct the potion and complete preliminary digestion. "Then tonight." Mike nodded and immediately finalized the time with Klein, then paused and said, "Mr. Sherlock, I think a friend of mine has some experience in treating kidney deficiency." Quote. Klein's face was full of black lines, and he immediately argued, "I need to correct you, I just ate something bad." Of course I believe you just ate something bad." Mike nodded, looking serious, but finally added, "But my friend, his medical skills are indeed excellent. Do you want to consider it?" "No need." Mike made an innocent expression, as if he saw a frustrated expression on Klein's face. This further strengthened his guess. Mr. Sherlock is anxious. October 4th, morning. The Azure Avenger arrived in the waters near Demir Island. Looking at the approaching land ahead, Alger's mood also became relaxed, and he said with a smile, "As long as we reach Demir Island, Pritz Harbor is not far away. You are also a pirate, is it okay to go to Demir Island?" Ember stood on the side of the deck, looking at the distant island, and suddenly asked, "I don't care." Alger spread his hands and said with an unusually calm expression, "I am not a traditional pirate. Even if I am wanted by the Ruined Kingdom government, it doesn't matter." Although he is nominally a pirate, he is essentially supported by the Storm Church. If something really happens, the Storm Church will definitely protect him. Of course, the premise is that he has not apostatized. Well, it should be said that the premise is that the news of his apostasy has not spread yet. However, he has always concealed himself very well, so there should be no flaws. As they were talking, the distance between the island and them was getting closer. Not long after, the Azure Avenger began to approach the port of Demir Island. Of course, it was still a private port this time. Even as a coastal colony of the Ruined Kingdom, private ports are not rare on Demir Island. After the Azure Avenger furled its sails, dropped anchor, and finally docked steadily at the private port's pier. They planned to stop here briefly, partly to replenish fresh water and food. On the other hand, it was also to obtain some information and understand what had happened at sea recently. And just like in Byam, Alger seemed equally familiar with Demir Island. You seem to be very familiar with this place. Do you come here often? Ember looked at a road sign on the side of the street that read, Flying Fish and Wine, and suddenly asked. No. Alger shrugged. Actually, I've only been here a few times, and I'm far from familiar with it. However, I do know some fixed places to get information. For example, casinos, brothels, and… Alger stopped, his gaze fixed on the building ahead, and then said, bars. Ember looked at the bar's sign, which read, Flying Fish and Wine, which seemed to be the name of the bar. The outside of the bar was covered with various wanted posters. The most eye-catching was the 800,000 pounds belonging to the King of the Five Seas. In addition, the bounties for ordinary pirates ranged from hundreds of pounds to thousands of pounds. From high to low, layer upon layer, it can also be considered a unique landscape peculiar to the sea. Creak. Alger pushed the door open and entered the bar, his gaze sweeping around. His burly figure and rugged appearance undoubtedly gave people a huge sense of oppression, and most of them subconsciously shifted their gaze, not daring to make eye contact. They were well aware that this was a warning. Simple, but very effective. Alger sat on a high stool at the bar, tapped the wooden counter lightly, and said, 2 glasses of South Wales beer. This is the best beer produced in the Ruined Kingdom. 12 pence. The bartender with bronze skin and white teeth wiped a glass and replied skillfully. Alger took out a $1 banknote and handed it over. In exchange for 2 large wooden cups filled with golden liquid, the aroma of the beer was rich and enticing. Alger picked up the cup containing South Wales beer, took a gulp, and asked casually. Are there any rumors at sea in the past half a month? How about you ask me? Before the bartender could speak, a slightly playful voice suddenly came from behind Alger. Ember looked in the direction of the voice. A young man with blonde hair was walking towards them. He had a pair of green eyes, but at this moment, his eyes held a hint of playfulness, appearing quite frivolous. At first glance, he looked exactly like a dissolute young master who had been hollowed out by wine and women. Then what do you know? Alger glanced at him and asked back. Good question. The blonde man clapped his hands in praise, but finally smiled and said, I know a lot of information, but why should I tell you? The other people in the bar couldn't help but twitch their mouths slightly. Why is this person so obnoxious? Moreover, didn't you initiate the conversation? Alger just glanced at him and said calmly, you are a hunter. The hunter pathway sequence 8 is called Provoker, and it's not just at the sequence 8 level. Almost every hunter pathway extraordinary above sequence 8 is very good at provoking others. You know a lot. The blonde man looked at Alger in surprise, then sat down next to him, and said generously, that's right, I'm a hunter, and also an adventurer. You can call me Anderson. Anderson Hood. Alger's expression changed slightly. Tisk. Anderson's expression became even more surprised. You actually know me. It seems you know more than just a little. Of course I know you. Alger asked calmly. Anderson Hood, the most famous adventurer and treasure hunter in the Misty Sea, known as the strongest hunter. Why are you in the Sonia Sea? No, not the strongest hunter. Anderson shook his head seriously, but then changed the subject and chuckled. However, if you insist, it's best to add a qualifier, below demigod. The strongest hunter below demigod. As for why I'm in the Sonia Sea. Anderson paused, then suddenly showed a mischievous smile again. It's the same old saying, why should I tell you? Do you know Patch? Ember suddenly spoke. It's no wonder he would ask this. It's just that Anderson's obnoxiousness is not exactly the same as Patch's, but at least it's equally obnoxious. Quote. Anderson's expression was unnatural for a moment, and he denied it flatly, don't know. Who is that? Saying that, without waiting for Ember to continue speaking, Anderson smoothly continued, getting back to the main topic, the reason I'm in the Sonia Sea is because someone invited me to join a treasure hunting team. But since it's not time to gather yet, I plan to play here for 2 days before going over. Oh, by the way. Anderson paused, then continued, I also want to attend the pirate conference that is about to be held recently. Pirate conference? Alger's eyes flashed, and he asked, when? 5 days later. Anderson said in surprise, don't you know? No way, there's no way someone doesn't know about this news by now, right? 5 days. Facing Anderson's provocation, Alger was not angered, but just frowned slightly. It will take 3 more days to send Ember to Pritz Harbor, and the remaining 2 days are not enough for the return trip. It seems that he will have to miss this pirate event. But it's not a big deal. Anyway, he has already obtained the wind-blessed potion for his promotion, so it doesn't matter whether he participates or not. After all, the pirate conference, to put it bluntly, is actually a platform for pirates to exchange information and spoils of war, which is not of much help to him now. Tisk, how boring. Seeing that Alger was unmoved by his provocation, Anderson pouted, his face full of disappointment. But this was only fleeting, because in the next second he continued to talk eloquently. But seriously, it would be a shame if you couldn't attend this pirate conference. In the past pirate conferences, there were at most 2 or 3 pirate generals participating. But this time, at least 5 pirate generals claim that they will participate in this conference. And Anderson leaned closer to Alger and said mysteriously, 2 of the pirate generals even had a conflict, and 2 days ago, a naval battle even broke out in this area. Pirate general. Alger's expression changed slightly, and he was about to ask for more details. But when he saw Anderson's calm and composed look, he immediately reacted and snapped his fingers. Another glass of South Wales beer. Bang. Soon, a glass of golden beer was brought to Anderson by the bartender. Refreshing. Anderson picked up the glass and took a gulp, wiping the liquid from the corner of his mouth before continuing. The 2 sides of the naval battle were Iceberg Admiral and Blood Admiral, and the specific reason for the conflict is unknown. But it is said. Anderson paused and lowered his voice, they are both looking for someone. Who? Alger immediately asked. Someone who wears 10 rings on his hand. Anderson said, clicking his tongue in wonder, they have been looking for this person since Byam. Not only Demir Island, they even sent people to infiltrate Pritz Harbor to find him. In other words, it was only for the pirate conference a few days later that they temporarily stopped. Don't you think they are crazy? What kind of person is worth them trying so hard? Don't you think so? Saying that, Anderson suddenly looked at Alger with profound meaning. Why is he looking at me like that? Alger's expression remained unchanged, but his heart began to be vigilant. He found out. No, it shouldn't be. Alger maintained his composure with great restraint. They had known 10 days ago that someone was looking for the person wearing 10 rings, and this characteristic clearly pointed directly to Ember. Although they didn't know the reason, they chose to take a detour for safety. Moreover, Ember has not worn 10 rings at the same time since then. It is impossible to be exposed. Is he probing? But why? Why would he suspect us? Or is it just that I'm overthinking? Alger frowned tightly, as if lost in thought. After a long time, he suddenly said, could it be that the person you mentioned has already been found by them, which led to their conflict? Yes and no. Upon hearing this, Anderson withdrew his gaze, his expression strange as he said, they did find the person wearing 10 rings, but it was clearly not the person they were looking for. That was just a nouveau riche from the ruined kingdom who wore rings all over his hands just to show off his wealth. The reason for the naval battle was indeed this, but after the Blood Admiral handed over his head, the conflict naturally ended. Tisk tisk, you didn't see that scene, it was simply horrific. He just wanted to show off his wealth, what did he do wrong? Anything else? Alger ignored Anderson's exaggerated gesticulations and simply asked calmly. Anything else? Anderson was stunned for a moment, not reacting. Looks like there's no other information. Alger said leisurely, can I trouble you to go somewhere else after using me? You're too heartless, aren't you? Anderson's eyes widened, a look of grief and indignation on his face as he said, you're kicking me away after using me. Aren't you being too heartless? Want a refill? Alger didn't even look at him, just glanced at Ember's empty glass and asked. No need, let's go. Ember shook his head, drank the last sip of wine, and got up to leave. Alger followed closely behind, and soon disappeared from the sight of the people in the tavern. Interesting. Anderson looked at the receding figures of the 2 with a faint smile on his lips. Although the 2 of them hid themselves well, seemingly with the blue seaweed-headed man in charge. But even the most exquisite disguise couldn't escape his eyes. Among these 2 people, the other one who had been silent was the one who truly held the dominant position. Moreover, he could feel that guy was very strong. Even a little stronger than him. And as the strongest hunter below demigod, Anderson didn't think there was a sequence 5 stronger than himself. In other words, He must have a powerful magical item on him. Yes, that's right, that's how it is. Of course, there was another question Anderson couldn't figure out. It's a bit strange. Anderson stroked his chin, surprised. Any pirate with a ghost ship is definitely ranked among the top in the 5 seas. But I've never heard of these two. Did they just rise suddenly recently, or were they too low-key before? Alger, what do you think? On the way back to the private port, Ember suddenly asked. I suggest we leave as soon as possible. Alger lowered his voice. The Blood Admiral should have been tracking us all the way from Byam. He's the one who hired the Silver Coin Viper to investigate. Although I don't know why the Iceberg Admiral is also involved, she must have been instructed by someone. However, judging from the situation, they should just be casting a wide net and don't know who the person wearing 10 rings is. Although the Blood Admiral probably won't notice small fry like us, it's better to leave as soon as possible to avoid getting caught up in it. Alger's expression was a little solemn, and his words were carefully chosen so as not to reveal too much information. The ones tracking them in Byam were from the Rose School, and judging from the current situation, the Blood Admiral should be a member of the Rose School, acting under orders to find their whereabouts. But before coming to Demir Island, he didn't expect the Blood Admiral to be so crazy. You should know that Demir Island is not an ordinary colony. There is a ruined kingdom military base on this island, and there are no less than 80 or 100 warships patrolling nearby. Such a powerful force, any pirate force except the 4 kings would have to retreat 3 steps. But the Blood Admiral chose to fight the Iceberg Admiral near Demir Island, which shows how reckless he is. Although judging from the situation, the other party should still have some reservations and did not cause much impact on Demir Island. But no one can say for sure if other changes will happen next. But no matter what, it's always right to leave as soon as possible. You make a lot of sense. Ember nodded slightly upon hearing Alger's analysis. But just as Alger thought he would nod in agreement, he slowly opened his mouth again. However, I hope to meet with the Iceberg Admiral. Why? Alger was silent for a long time, then asked hesitantly. Ember casually explained, I want to know why she appeared in this vicinity. Ember didn't care who the Blood Admiral was or why he was looking for him. But the Iceberg Admiral was different. In any case, she had helped him. And being hunted by a demigod from the ruined kingdom was also caused by him. This incident also directly led to the Iceberg Admiral having to set off for Sunia Island to take refuge. And according to the time calculation, she should have already arrived at Sunia Island a week ago. But now she is taking huge risks to appear near Demir Island, and even specifically wants to find herself. This really made Ember a little curious. So Ember changed his mind and decided to meet Edwina first. At least he had to know why she was suddenly in such a hurry to find him. Then we'll go directly to her. Although Alger was surprised by Ember's change of heart, he still echoed the question. Ember pondered for a moment, then gently shook his head. The problem is we don't know where her ship is now. Maybe we can only wait for the pirate convention a few days later. Alger thought seriously and analyzed, many people will attend the pirate convention, and we won't be too conspicuous if we blend in. If the Iceberg Admiral also attends this pirate convention, it shouldn't be difficult to find an opportunity to meet her then. This is indeed a feasible option, but firstly, we don't know the exact location of the pirate convention. Secondly, we are not sure if we can arrive in time. Alger shook his head somewhat helplessly. The plan was good, but it might not be feasible. Because the pirate convention is not being held for the first time, but only the 4 kings and the 7 great generals can know in advance each time. Other pirates only receive information about a week before the pirate convention is held. However, since the location of the pirate convention is not fixed each time, and the time is only a short week, this means that most pirates actually cannot arrive in time. It is publicly stated that this is to guard against surprise attacks from the navies of various countries and the powerhouses of the major churches. As for this explanation, whether others believe it or not, Alger certainly scoffed at it. But as for the specific reason, that is only a matter of opinion. Regarding this question, Anderson emerged from somewhere, a smile on his face, and said, I can answer that, but in exchange, how about you take me with you when you go? No need. Alger glanced at him and sneered, the location of the pirate convention is not a secret. I can just ask any pirate. What a coincidence. Anderson wasn't angry at all, but instead smiled and said, there are no real pirates nearby. They all left 2 days ago to attend the pirate convention. On the one hand, it's because the place is quite far, and on the other hand, it's because the naval battle between the 2 pirate generals 2 days ago attracted a naval cleanup. These navies can't deal with pirate generals, but they have no problem dealing with ordinary pirates. So you can't find a single pirate now, because no pirate dares to stay. Do you want to know the location of the pirate convention? Unfortunately, I'm the only one on this island who knows. No wonder it was so deserted on the way here. Alger felt speechless in his heart, and he actually believed about 70 to 80% of it. After all, although Demir Island does have a naval base, it is not a forbidden area for pirates. There are plenty of pirates who like to play it rough. No wonder the people he saw in the tavern before were all crooked melons and cracked dates, not a single real pirate. Did they all leave? How about it? Anderson said somewhat playfully, I have to remind you, you don't have much time to think, after all, that place is quite far. It's just that you have a ghost ship, and there's still hope of arriving within 5 days. Alger ignored him and instead looked at Ember, asking for his opinion. Since you have the address, why don't you go yourself? Ember looked at the playful expression on Anderson's face and suddenly asked. That's because. Anderson was immediately speechless, stammering and unable to give a reason. Because no one is willing to take you, right? Ember glanced at him, and without waiting for him to speak, he said lightly, you came from the Misty Sea to the Sonia Sea, probably by taking a merchant ship along the coastline. After all, you are an adventurer, not a pirate, so you don't have to worry about being wanted by the major kingdoms. You said the treasure hunting team's assembly time hasn't arrived yet, but actually, Demir Island is your assembly point, right? Anderson's expression completely froze on his face, which also indirectly confirmed Ember's guess. Originally, the treasure hunting team should have planned to go treasure hunting directly, but due to the sudden news of the pirate convention. This caused the others in the treasure hunting team to temporarily change their minds and prepare to attend the pirate convention before going treasure hunting. So, why didn't they specifically take you with them? Did you arrive late and miss it? Or did the others deliberately not take you with them because they were afraid you would cause trouble? I think the latter is more likely. Alger added a blow to the conversation. Adventurers belong neither to the official side nor to the pirates. They will not be wanted by the authorities, but they will not be accepted by pirates either. And if this group of adventurers goes to the pirate convention, no one will attack them without reason. After all, they are treasure hunters who specialize in finding treasures, not bounty hunters who collect bounties on pirate heads. But if this group of adventurers takes the initiative to cause trouble, they will offend all the pirates. At that time, it will be difficult for them to leave the pirate convention alive. Of course, adventurers are not fools. Of course, they will not offend pirates without reason, just as they will not offend the authorities without reason. And Alger had already witnessed the power of Anderson's sharp tongue. It was impossible to expect him not to offend people. If the treasure hunting team dared to take him to the pirate convention, the other pirates would dare to wipe them out there. So, without surprise, the treasure hunting team chose to abandon him and secretly go to the pirate convention. And once the treasure hunting team left, only some ordinary passenger ships were left on the island. They definitely wouldn't dare to go to the pirate convention. This is why Anderson had to stay on this island until now. This is an accident, an accident. Anderson's forehead bulged with veins, and he argued with his neck stiffened, it's just that I overslept the night before, and they accidentally forgot to take me with them when they left. After the pirate convention ends, they will still come back to find me. I believe that. Alger nodded slightly, although this mouth isn't great, the strength is okay. Anderson was so angry that his face turned red, and he really wanted to hit someone. After all, he was always the one who made others angry. When was it ever his turn to be angered by others? Chapter 108. As long as Steiner launches an attack, everything will be alright. On the Sonia Sea, an island with a towering dormant volcano. Ships with masts and sails lined up and docked, filling the not-so-small pier. The pirates, singing, shouting, laughing, cursing, and cheering were endless, making the place seem like an ocean of revelry. The Azure Avenger was also among them, slowly sailing towards the pier. I'm going to find the treasure hunting team, so long. As soon as he docked, before the ship had even stabilized, Anderson left just one sentence and jumped off the ship as if fleeing, his figure quickly disappearing into the crowd on the pier. Tisk. Alger shook his head speechlessly, seeing how scared the kid was. Ember stood by the side of the ship, his gaze sweeping across the many sailboats at the pier. He did not see the Golden Dream, which belonged to Edwina and glowed golden under the sun. The view isn't very good here, let's go there. Alger pointed to a nearby cliff and reminded him. Ember thought for a moment, walked down from the Azure Avenger, climbed onto the nearby cliff, and took in everything below from a high vantage point. Alger also followed onto the cliff. Below, layers of sailboats filled the pier and other nearby piers. Looking out, there were at least hundreds of pirate ships, and the pirates gathered here numbered tens of thousands. They were densely packed, filling the pier, with so many people that it was impossible to tell who was who. Finding the right person among such a large number of pirates would likely be quite difficult. Found him, Ember said suddenly. Where? Alger was stunned for a moment. Ember reached out and pointed to a certain spot on the pier. Alger's gaze followed the direction he pointed. There was a crowd of people, but no one with distinct features. Alger couldn't tell who Ember was referring to at all. That's Edwina's bosun, Danitz. Ember casually explained. After thinking for a moment, he changed into the black knight armor he wore when they first met and turned to walk towards that Sun Knight. Quote. Alger watched Ember change clothes in a second, feeling that it was truly beyond his comprehension and his mood was extremely complex. Ember was not wearing the sleeping dragon crest ring, so the sound of the armor joints colliding as he walked was exceptionally clear, audible even in the noisy crowd. Therefore, both he and Danitz, who was scratching his head anxiously in the crowd, quickly noticed each other. Praise the sun. Danitz understood, leaned closer, and said in a low voice. Praise the sun. After exchanging the code phrase, Danitz no longer hesitated, turned around, squeezed through the crowd, and walked towards the depths of the island. Finally, they stopped at a simple small wooden hut in the depths of the island. Mr. Ash. Danitz took the initiative to speak. The captain has something very important and wants to meet with you. All right. Ember asked, when should I go? Not now. Danitz shook his head and said helplessly, the captain is currently being entangled by Blood Admiral's people and cannot get away. Even I had to expend a lot of effort to sneak onto this island. If you want to meet the captain, it can only be through me. Danitz thought for a moment and then explained, to be precise, it's through me performing a spirit medium ritual, so that you and the captain can communicate. Saying that, Danitz raised his wrist to look at the time and immediately breathed a sigh of relief. Good, fortunately you arrived in time, it's just the right time for Blue Star time. Otherwise, if we missed the morning Blue Star time, we would have to wait until 4 in the afternoon to communicate with the captain. Danitz said to himself while taking out the various materials he had prepared beforehand. He began to set up the altar somewhat clumsily, performing the spirit medium ritual he had only recently learned. Spirit medium ritual. Ember looked at the so-called spirit medium ritual, performed by Danitz, a look of suspicion on his face. Why did this so-called spirit medium ritual give him a sense of familiar déjà vu? As soon as the thought emerged, the various objects on the altar floated up, except for the 3 candles. Danitz's body trembled uncontrollably, his expression gradually becoming cold. Soon, he let out a female voice in the style of Iceberg Admiral. Good morning, Mr. Ash. Good morning. Ember asked, Ms. Edwina, do you seem to have something urgent to see me about? Yes. Edwina nodded gently and explained, my teacher hopes I can invite you to visit Leuenberg, preferably leaving now. There, you might be able to learn some answers you've been seeking for a long time. After a pause, Edwina continued, people can always find their answers in Leuenberg. Ember's expression changed slightly, and he pressed, who is your teacher? She is called. Edwina opened her mouth but made no sound, and after a long while, she whispered, I'm very sorry, I cannot reveal her name to the outside world. She could write the corresponding name in her letter to her teacher because only the teacher could see the letter. But most of the time, it was impossible for her even to say it out loud. Her spirituality was warning her. I will go. Ember pondered for a long time and slowly gave his reply, however, this will take some time. Once I finish what I'm currently busy with, I can make a trip to Leuenberg. By then, I will come back to the sea to find you. But, Edwina hesitated, seeming somewhat conflicted. But in the end, she chose to compromise. Of course, Mr. Ash. Edwina regained her calm expression and said softly, if you are finished with what you are busy with, please be sure to come find me at sea, and I will take you to Leuenberg. Also, Edwina said using Danitz's body, Danitz has requested a long leave from me. He won't be returning to the Golden Dream for the time being because he wishes to stay on Demir Island for a vacation. We will continue heading north to Sunia Island next, and he will be responsible for contacting Mr. Ash during this time. Okay. Ember glanced at Danitz and replied, if I have a need, I will contact him. Then, farewell, Mr. Ash. Edwina said goodbye softly and then voluntarily cut off the connection with Danitz. The spirit medium ritual ended, Danitz could feel Edwina leaving, and he successfully regained control of his body. But he looked rather downcast, as if he couldn't be happy no matter what. Because he was clearly just here to deliver a message. How did he end up on vacation by some strange twist of fate? Danitz was practically in tears. According to the captain's meaning, once Ember came to find him, he could return to the Golden Dream. But what if Ember never came to find him? Wouldn't he be unable to go back for the rest of his life? What kind of situation is this? Danitz felt incredibly aggrieved and indignant. Why on earth did he volunteer for this task? Ember's gaze passed over Danitz, his sight seemingly penetrating the obstruction of the wooden hut, and he said indifferently. What about you? Do you also have something to bring to me? Huh. Danitz's expression changed slightly, and he subconsciously looked towards the door. What did he mean? Were there others outside? Was he being followed? Crack. A figure pushed the door open and entered. He just glanced indifferently at Danitz, which immediately caused Danitz's pupils to contract sharply. He was tall, dark-skinned, muscular, with hair curled like marbles. Based on his physical characteristics, Danitz immediately recognized the person's identity. Mavity Steel, a great pirate with a bounty of 6,000 pounds. Most importantly, he was Blood Admiral Senor's second mate. Your Excellency Divine Emissary, the captain asked me to bring you a message. Mavity glanced at Danitz with disdain, then turned his gaze to Ember, his expression immediately becoming humble and respectful. Mavity glanced at Danitz, his eyes containing a warning. Ha ha. Danitz sneered, turned around, and walked out of the wooden hut. Even if you lose the person, you can't lose the stance, you can't lose your confidence. Danitz walked out of the wooden hut with his head held high and chest puffed out, and closed the door behind him. However, after only a few steps, Danitz's expression suddenly changed, and he quickly ran towards the depths of the island. The captain had been dealing with Blood Admiral on the Golden Dream to avoid arousing suspicion. He had only secretly disembarked halfway and sneaked onto the island. After all, he was just a Sequence 7 bosun, not very famous and not too conspicuous. And Ember had met him before. With the other party's strength to kill a demigod, there was no reason he wouldn't recognize him upon meeting. The only question was whether the other party would attend the pirate convention. After all, although they had spread the information in advance, they couldn't guarantee it was foolproof. What if the person had already returned to Backland? Sending him to the island could only be considered an insurance policy, to prevent Ember from coming to the island but not being able to see them. And now, he had met the person, and his insurance policy had served its purpose. But who knew that Blood Admiral was also insidious and cunning, actually sending someone to follow him? He had to quickly tell the captain about this. The god has issued a decree, requesting you to collect as many as 22 blasphemy cards as possible, especially the moon slate. Mavity's expression carried a hint of fanaticism, but he deliberately paused mid-sentence before continuing, and the mother slate. Why the hesitation? Ember asked calmly. Forgive my disrespect, Your Excellency Divine Emissary. Mavity quickly explained, these are the captain's original words. It seems there were interruptions during the transmission of the Divine Oracle, which is why I didn't know how to accurately convey the content of the Divine Oracle to you. Interruptions. Ember looked at Mavity with deep meaning. It is known that behind Mavity is Blood Admiral, and behind Blood Admiral is the Rose School. And the Rose School believes in the so-called, bound god. Even if Mavity had 10,000 guts, he wouldn't dare to falsely transmit a Divine Oracle. But the question is, why were there interruptions in the Divine Oracle? It couldn't be that their god also suffered memory loss like himself, forgetting what he was saying halfway through, could it? However, the reason doesn't matter. Because Ember was not familiar with this, bound god, and had no intention of doing as he said. I understand, Ember said indifferently. Your Excellency Divine Emissary. Mavity Steel dared not object, and simply lowered his head respectfully, saying, I will be on standby in Byam at any time. If you need anything, you can send someone to find me in Byam. After speaking, Mavity respectfully backed out of the wooden hut, and soon disappeared from sight. As for Danitz, he had already left the moment he exited the wooden hut, and had no intention of waiting until the two finished talking before returning. And after the two left one after another, Ember also left the wooden hut. Before leaving, he glanced at the dormant volcano located in the center of the island, then quickly retracted his gaze and walked towards the pier. On the way to the pier, he had already quietly changed out of the black knight armor he was wearing. Therefore, when he arrived at the pier, he was not conspicuous among the crowded pirates. Using the cover of the crowd, he quietly returned to the Azure Avenger. Creak. As soon as Ember returned to the ship, Alger, who was standing by the side, noticed him, and his expression seemed somewhat serious. I suddenly discovered something very strange. Alger saw Ember return and said in a deep voice. What? Ember looked at him with slight curiosity. The pirate convention. Alger quickly and concisely said, this isn't the first time a pirate convention has been held. It's basically held periodically. Although the location is different each time, these locations all have one thing in common. Alger said with a solemn expression, "On every island where a pirate convention is held, there is a dormant volcano. Although this could just be a simple coincidence, I always feel that there should be some secrets hidden within that we don't know about. And these secrets might be hidden in that dormant volcano." Alger took a deep breath. He was 80% sure that the location of the pirate assembly was deliberately chosen. For example, the location of the pirate assembly would only be announced to nearby pirates a week in advance, although the stated reason was to guard against sudden attacks from the navies of various countries and the powerhouses of major churches. But this explanation was actually not valid at all. If the navies of various countries and the major churches were truly determined, they could wipe out all the pirates on the sea at any time. Not to mention the location of this pirate assembly was very special. It was located north of the Rothschild Islands, very close to the main strongholds of the major forces. Whether it was Demir Island where the ruined kingdom had a military base, or Byam, the capital of the Rothschild Islands, or Sunia Island of the Fursak Empire, or even Passu Island where the Storm Church altar was located, the voyage from here was no more than 7 days. If pirates could get there, the navy could certainly get there too. But the fact was, the navies of all countries made no move. The Storm Church was the same, completely turning a blind eye to this pirate assembly that was practically happening on their doorstep. This meant that the various countries and major churches had most likely reached an agreement with the pirates on something. And this matter was very likely related to the dormant volcano on the island. After meeting with Ember, Mavadisteel quietly left the port aboard a sailing ship. In the sea area tens of nautical miles away from the pirate assembly, he rendezvoused with a ship that was painted entirely black. The sail on its mast did not have the skull pattern commonly used by pirates, but a distorted tree that seemed to be piled up from endless flesh. That was the flagship of Blood Admiral, the Flesh Tree. The sailing ship Mavadi was on quickly pulled alongside it, and then he leapt onto the deck of the Flesh Tree. "Senor sir," Mavadi said respectfully, "I tracked Iceberg Admiral's bosun Danitz for a long time, successfully met the Divine Messenger, and conveyed the Divine Oracle to him." Mavadi recounted the entire process of the event. Full of joy, he originally thought that Senor would praise and commend him. However, when he raised his head, he only met Senor's gloomy face, which seemed like it could drip water. Mavadi's heart sank, feeling that something was wrong, and he quickly lowered his head again. "That's not a divine messenger." Blood Admiral's voice seemed to suppress a long-accumulated anger, and he said in a deep voice, "Just now, the god sent a new divine oracle. A demigod has stolen the god's authority and sent us a false divine oracle. That person is not a divine messenger either, he is the enemy of our god." Mavadi felt his mouth dry, and an inexplicable fear enveloped his heart. He quickly said, "I'll go back and kill him right away." "No rush." Blood Admiral's expression was sinister, and he sneered, "Jex Sir will personally take action." He was not the only one who was deceived, Jex Sir was also deceived. Because it was Jex himself who received the divine oracle. So Jex Sir must personally take action to capture that person and force him to reveal who is behind him. Only by finding out who is falsely transmitting the divine oracle and personally handling all this can he wash away his humiliation. Especially that unknown demigod behind the other party. How dare they falsely transmit the divine oracle? Coming and going as they please. Did they think their Rose School is a public toilet? "Captain." The sailor on the lookout platform suddenly shouted loudly, "Something's wrong." Senor looked towards the bow of the ship. Not far away, a sailing ship shimmering golden in the sunlight was setting sail. It was heading north, away from the Flesh Tree. It seemed like they were even giving up on the pirate assembly that was close at hand. However, this was not unexpected. Iceberg Admiral had no intention of participating in the pirate assembly in the first place. She came here only to meet with that false divine messenger, and relay information to him. Now that the purpose had been achieved, the other party naturally wouldn't stay long. "Don't bother with them." Senor withdrew his gaze and said indifferently, "Just guard this sea area and don't let anyone escape." Although they had just had a naval battle with Edwina's Golden Dream not long ago. But ultimately, both sides were just putting on a show. Otherwise, they wouldn't have stopped after just one naval battle. If it were a fight to the death, at least one of the two flagships would have been sunk by the other. Although Edwina seemed to have an unclear relationship with that false divine messenger, capturing her might also force out the person behind the false divine messenger. But there was no need for that. The false divine messenger was on the island, and capturing him would reveal everything. Since that was the case, why bother going far to find Iceberg Admiral? After all, no matter what, the other party was a pirate general just like himself. If the other party was determined to run, he might not be able to catch up. What's more, it was not impossible that this was a tactic to lure the tiger away from the mountain. Senor had already committed the sin of blasphemy by lightly believing the false divine oracle. So now, he would rather do nothing than make a mistake. Anyway, Jex Sir was already on his way. As long as Jex Sir arrived, everything would be fine. What do you think is in that volcano? In the captain's cabin of the Azure Avenger, Ember suddenly asked thoughtfully. I don't know. Alger shook his head and spread his hands. There are tens of thousands of pirates here. Even if most of them are crowded at the dock, a large number will still actively go deep into the island to explore. If the secrets on the island were so easy to discover, they wouldn't be called secrets. But it doesn't matter. Alger said casually, anyway, whatever secrets are on the island have nothing to do with me. That's something for those big figures to consider. If he were a Sequence 5, with the same strength as those pirate generals, he would definitely not miss this opportunity, but would personally go explore. In Rosal the Great's words, this is called casting a rod whether there's a date or not. But he was only a Sequence 7, not even a Sequence 6. So what he wanted most now was not adventure, but to stably pass the stage of digesting the potion. Only after being promoted to Sequence 6 could he become someone second only to the 4 kings and the 7 pirate generals in this sea area. Of course, this was only for him, not including Ember. After all, with Ember's strength, he definitely had the capital to explore the secrets on the island. Give me half an hour. Ember said slowly, leave in half an hour. No problem. Alger nodded and agreed without hesitation, finally adding, it just so happens that Mr. World is still missing a medulla crystal of the Elf Spring. I'll go to the trading market to see if there is any. After speaking, Alger took the initiative to leave the captain's cabin and went down from the Azure Avenger. Not long after Alger left, Ember thought for a moment and also got off the ship. He passed through the crowd and came to the nearby forest. Then, he shook the bell. Ding-a-ling-ling, accompanied by the clear sound of the bell. A figure appeared abruptly. It was the Mimic Tear transformed into a Black Knight. And at the moment the Mimic Tear appeared, its figure quickly darted towards the depths of the island. Even though this was close to the dock, even though the dock was crowded with pirates who came to attend the pirate assembly, even though quite a few people saw the Mimic Tear. But this did not cause much of a stir. After all, there was more than one person who wanted to go explore the center of the island. However, the Mimic Tear's target for this trip was much clearer than that of ordinary pirates, and that was the crater. The surface of the island was covered with dense forests, indicating that this volcano had not erupted for quite some time. Inside the forest, birds chirped and insects crawled, and occasionally small wild beasts darted by, presenting a scene of vibrant life and flourishing nature. The Mimic Tear stepped on the humus-rich ground and quickly moved towards the crater. And if viewed from high above, one would only see a towering chimney, wrapped in green vegetation. And even when standing on the edge of the crater and looking down, one could not see any trace of magma. It was as if this was truly just an ordinary dormant volcano. At the same time, at the top edge of the crater, the Mimic Tear was leaning over and looking down. Looking down from the top edge of the crater, a few trees stubbornly grew on the cliff face. But at the very bottom, only pitch blackness could be seen. Below seemed to be a bottomless abyss, swallowing all sight and courage from above. Even people without acrophobia would inevitably feel a trace of fear when standing on the edge. It was as if some monster that chose people to devour vaguely existed in the darkness below. Of course, if someone accidentally fell down, even a mid-sequence extraordinary would be smashed to pieces. They would also be unable to survive and explore whether there was danger within. But for the Mimic Tear, this was clearly not a problem. The Mimic Tear gently waved the lucid staff in its hand, and with the crisp sound of magic being released, countless floating tiny blue starlight emerged, gathering around the Mimic Tear like fireflies. These starlight dispelled the darkness and illuminated everything around. Open black lens bracket starlight close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. One of the glintstone magics from the Academy of Raya Lucaria. Can release floating small starlight to illuminate the surroundings. Can be cast while moving. Magic given to mages who leave the academy and embark on a journey. Endless night, sunless underground, imprisoned cells. No matter when or where, the stars are always by the mage's side. Close black lens bracket. Swish. The next moment, the Mimic Tear leapt from the edge of the crater, jumping into the abyss below without the slightest hesitation. In the sea area more than 10 nautical miles away from the island, Blood Admiral Senor was leading his pirate fleet to patrol around. And he himself had been staying on his flagship, the Flesh Tree. He was waiting for someone. Where are they? An indifferent voice suddenly sounded from behind Senor. Jex, sir. The originally arrogant Senor was startled, and quickly bowed his head respectfully, saying quickly, "They are still on the island." Someone saw him heading towards the crater in the center of the island. However, he seems to be accompanied by 3 other helpers. "It doesn't matter," Jex said coldly, "it's the same no matter how many people there are. Below demigod are all ants. If a demigod intended to kill, let alone just 4 people. Even if he had to be an enemy of everyone on this island, he wouldn't even frown. At most, it would just be a little more troublesome to kill them. What's more, he was not an ordinary demigod, but a sequence 3 demigod. Dealing with a few sneaky rats who dared to spread false divine oracles in the name of God, wasn't that as easy as turning a hand. "Jex, sir," Senor was just about to speak. But the next second, Jex, who had been standing in front of him, instantly disappeared. In the sky, a seabird cried out and quickly flew towards the center of the island. Clearly, Jex was not in the mood to listen to him say even one more word. He had already gone to track down the guy who dared to blaspheme the gods. Senor could only shake his head helplessly and swallow the words he had originally intended to say. "Let's wait until Jex Sir comes back," Senor thought. Dealing with a few rats, with Jex Sir's strength, wasn't that as easy as picking them up. Found them. Jex's eyes were as sharp as an eagle's, accurately catching the mimic tier located at the top of the crater from a distance of several thousand meters. Although he had never seen that false divine messenger, he was sure that this was the person he was looking for. After all, there was only one person on the entire island covered in black armor. The grimness on Jex's face flashed and then returned to an indifferent expression. But the next second, his expression control seemed to lose control, revealing a look of disbelief. Because in his line of sight, the other party actually leapt down towards the bottom of the volcano. "He's crazy." Jex's pupils contracted sharply. "You know that place is." "No, they probably don't know." Jex immediately denied this guess, the other party most likely just didn't know. Now, the most important thing for him is to wash away the shame, only then can he obtain the forgiveness of the gods. What's more, even if they know what secrets are in the volcano, so what? That thing is already dead. Jex took a deep breath, and his figure began to quickly switch between surrounding objects, also rapidly moving towards the bottom of the volcano. Snap! Mimic Tier landed steadily, its feet firmly stepping on the ground beneath. The surroundings seemed to be enveloped by endless darkness, without a trace of light. But soon, countless starlight accompanied Mimic Tear to the underground, dispelling the darkness, illuminating the surroundings. Unlike the lush greenery on the island's surface, the inside of the volcano only had a desolate giant pit. And this is clearly unreasonable. Even a dead volcano once had magma inside. Under high temperature, all beings are equal. Even after cooling and solidification, the internal terrain should be relatively flat. But here, there wasn't even the imagined layer of igneous rock formed by magma cooling and solidifying. But the deep pit at the bottom of the volcano seemed as if something had fallen from the sky and was forcefully smashed out. As soon as the thought emerged, Mimic Tear stopped thinking. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. From above his head, countless branches of trees detached, shooting down at Mimic Tear below like a volley of arrows. And on the ground, countless leaves and pebbles that had fallen and accumulated over the long years suddenly flew up, forming a tightly locked fishing net, wanting to confine Mimic Tear within it. At this moment, it was as if every tree, every leaf, every stone, and every blade of grass around had come alive at this moment, wanting to put it to death. All of this happened silently. But under the illumination of starlight, everything was revealed. Mimic Tear quickly reacted. It gripped the lucid staff tightly in its hands, causing a cluster of scorching flames to emerge from the purple crystal at the top of the staff, forming a red magic circle with peculiar symbols in the air. And in an instant, it was thrust into the ground by Mimic Tear. Boom! The originally silent volcano seemed to be reawakened at this moment. Endless lava gushed out from beneath Mimic Tear's feet, letting out a long dormant roar. They turned into scorching lava projectiles, splashing out in all directions, burning everything around fiercely, truly turning this desolate great pit into a feast of lava. Under the high temperature of the lava, everything around was completely incinerated by it. Whether it was branches or stones, before they could touch Mimic Tear, they were swallowed by this endless blazing fire. Everything will be revealed before the flames. Open black lens bracket Wrath of Gelmir close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket one of Gelmir's lava magics. Can cause lava eruptions from the ground, splashing outwards. By charging up, the eruption time can be extended. It is said that this magic represents the wrath of the volcano. Then, the idea of intending to cast it can be said to be the pride of humans, or snakes, close black lens bracket. Jex's offensive was resolved in an instant, but at the same time, he launched a new offensive. Mimic Tear's magic turned the bottom of the dead volcano into a true lava purgatory, defending against the offensive for it. But these lavas seemed to come alive again in an instant, turning into clusters of lava fireballs rising into the air, and surging towards Mimic Tear in the center at an even faster speed. In fact, if possible, Jex would rather control Mimic Tear's armor. Killing it with its armor would be dramatic enough. But unfortunately, he, who can control all inanimate objects, precisely cannot control the other party's armor. This means that the other party's armor is also a magical item itself. Just these few magical items and the abilities the other party itself displayed already made Jex realize that this mission might not be as smooth as he imagined. But it doesn't matter, I will act. Bang! Mimic Tear's staff was still firmly embedded in the ground, and countless lavas surged from beneath its feet. Colliding with the lava projectiles controlled by Jex, both sides seemed to be in a stalemate. But in fact, all of this happened in an instant. Jex was hidden in the dark, quietly brewing a larger offensive. But almost at the same time, Mimic Tear had firmly locked onto Jex's location. The lucid staff in its hand was still stuck in the ground, continuously releasing lava to burn the earth. But on the other hand, a flaming mark that seemed to be burning fiercely quietly appeared. Open black lens bracket frenzied flame seal close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket a phantom holy seal bestowed by the three fingers which can strengthen the prayer of the frenzied flame. This is the symbol of the Lord of Frenzied Flame. Can boost the power of prayer with strength, dexterity, intelligence, and faith. Boost the power of incantations. Close black lens bracket. In an instant, Mimic Tear suddenly raised its head and looked towards a certain spot on the high cliff. It had already locked onto the opponent's location. Mimic Tear released the staff it was holding, and holding the burning frenzied flame seal, it embraced its head. Golden flame runes appeared above its head, and scorching flames also surged in its eyes in an instant. Not good. Jex's pupils contracted sharply, and a sense of instinctive crisis arose from the bottom of his heart. That was spirituality warning him. He wanted to move to other objects nearby. But it was already too late at this point. Mimic Tear stared directly at Jex's location. Two scorching rays, resembling both flames and lightning, gushed out from its eyes. Sizzle. Bang. The rays cut through the air in a graceful and dazzling arc at a speed that seemed faster than light. Ultimately, without surprise, they hit Jex's body. Even though he hadn't revealed his true form at this moment, and even though he had possessed other objects. But the rays seemed to have a built-in tracking ability, hitting his body accurately and without fail. Accompanied by painful screams, Jex could no longer maintain the state of being difficult for others to see. From 100 meters high in the air, his aged figure quickly became translucent and real. And on this body, which was between illusion and reality, golden flames covered him tightly like a gangrene attached to the bone. Bang! The pain caused Jex's spirit to lose support, and he could not only not maintain his form. He himself fell directly from high altitude, crashing heavily onto the ground. But you should know. At this moment, the underground had already been turned into real magma by Wrath of Gelmir. Jex, who fell onto the magma, naturally wouldn't sink, unless his density was greater than the magma. But falling onto magma with a temperature of several thousand degrees still caused his body to suffer unimaginable pain for an ordinary person. His clothes were incinerated the moment they came into contact with the magma. His skin was burned, and even his flesh and blood were melted, revealing the bone. The physical pain made Jex extremely suffering, but it also seemed to give him a shred of clarity. Mimic Tear's appearance was reflected in his brown eyes, but more than that was the fiercely burning frenzied flame. His sanity was being burned away by the frenzied flame step by step. In no time, even his soul would become completely frenzied. But at this moment, this brown-skinned old man with sparse white hair and deep wrinkles showed astonishing perseverance. He endured the pain and opened his palm, and at some point, a wet, sticky, palm-sized little person appeared in his hand. This little person had only one hole on its face, from which grayish-white mist was being exhaled and inhaled. Jex didn't hesitate, enduring the double torture of physical and spiritual pain, and directly stuffed the little person into his mouth. In that instant, the pain seemed to be expelled from Jex's body and spirit. His sanity seemed to be preserved, yet it also seemed to be swallowed by a deeper form of madness. His physical body also changed. His body surface turned black, his skin wrinkled, and secreted obvious water stains, his hair, eyebrows, etc., all withered and fell off, and his limbs became thinner and longer accordingly. In just a second, Jex seemed to be assimilated by that little person, becoming a large, black, long-limbed, wet baby with swollen and wrinkled skin. His eyes, nose, mouth, and ears detached from their original positions and moved towards the center of his face, seemingly gathering together to form a brand new organ. His skin, his arms, and the shape of his new organ all carried an unspeakable mystery and evil. Without a doubt, the ability that could be used as a life-saving straw at the last moment must be his hidden trump card. However, although all of this happened in the blink of an eye, Mimic Tear had no intention of giving him any chance to react. Mimic Tear pulled up the lucid staff that was tightly stuck in the ground, and cast a new magic again. Wah! Jex roared like crazy, making a sound like a baby crying. But Mimic Tear in front of him was completely unaffected. It just raised the staff in its hand again, and endless blue light like a starry sky condensed from the tip of the staff. Under its light, it was as if even the sun paled in comparison. The condensed blue starlight seemed to turn into a deep starry sky. As if endless light was released from the tip of the staff, like a comet streaking across the sky, dragging a long tail. Or like a brilliant galaxy, extending and spreading from the starry sky. The middle of the galaxy was dark and deep like the night, while the outer layer of light carried a different kind of splendor and brilliance. And this galaxy was frantically devouring everything in its path, including Jex, who had already transformed into a wet baby. Bang! Its body was instantly covered by the light, as if an endless galaxy was continuously washing over his body, again and again. Under the washing of the galaxy, Jex could no longer even make a baby's cry. Open black lens bracket Comet Azdalar close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. One of the primeval sorcerers, Azdalar's magic. One of the legendary sorceries. It is said that the hometown of the glintstone is located in the distant starry sky. Can release a torrent of starlight, a colossal comet. Can be continuously cast. The origin Azdalar glimpsed is darkness. It is said that the dark abyss not only took away his mind, but also made him feel fear. Close black lens bracket. P.S. Regarding updates, let's take a vote. 1. One update per day, one chapter of 9 to 10,000 words. 2. Two updates per day, each update 4 to 5,000 words. Approximately. I know many readers don't like to leave comments, and I won't force it. I will post 2 comments, 1 and 2, and choose the one with more likes. Chapter 109 Mimic Tear, I don't know. Open black lens bracket soul plus 5 million close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket soul of demigod Jex close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket, silent disciple, extraordinary characteristics close black lens bracket. On the dock, Ember, who was waiting for the Mimic Tear to explore, suddenly looked a little confused. Demigod Jex. No, who are you? There's a demigod hidden in that volcano. But why? Also, that's 5 million souls. Sequence 4 Chunas only gave 50,000 souls. 5 million at once, wouldn't that be a sequence 3 demigod? But the problem is, exactly who are you? Open black lens bracket soul of demigod Jex. One of the deformed souls with power. After using it, you can obtain many souls. You can also extract its power through refining. He is a devout demigod. But he believes in a wrong god. Isn't this a form of blasphemy? Close black lens bracket. We got the stuff. Alger walked through the crowd and waved at Ember. He was still holding a crystal in his hand. Its shape was similar to a faded egg, and its shell seemed very thin, as if it could shatter with a touch. You could hear the sound of flowing water inside without even shaking it. It was obvious without thinking that this was the medullary crystal of the elf spring. Didn't you go explore? Alger asked curiously, or have you already finished exploring? Almost. Ember said vaguely, let's leave as soon as possible. Okay. Alger spread his hands and turned to walk towards the Azure Avenger with Ember. Although he was also curious about the secrets of the island, he would not proactively ask. Mr. Fool taught him a principle. Everything has a price. If he wanted to obtain the secret in Ember's hands, he had to pay the corresponding price. But obviously, he probably couldn't afford this price. After all, the secret on this island is likely coveted by even the 4 kings. Of course, it could also be fear. Bang! The Azure Avenger's sails quickly unfurled, and the dropped anchor was also quickly being hoisted. And just as the Azure Avenger was about to leave the port, the Mimic Tear also silently returned to the ship, back to Ember's cabin. And through the memories of the Mimic Tear, Ember finally understood what exactly happened in the volcano. However, this did not resolve his doubts. For example, so who exactly is this Jex? Ember was full of doubts. He had thought that Jex might be a demigod sealed in the volcano. After all, he had encountered similar situations before. But from the Mimic Tear's memories, Jex was not a native of the volcano. Moreover, the opponent's attacks were all lethal, clearly aimed at killing. But the problem is, why Was it because the mimic tear forcefully entered the volcano that attracted the pursuit? Is this Jex actually the guardian of the volcano? But why would a seemingly ordinary volcano need a demigod to guard it? But if he really was the so-called guardian, then the defense of this volcano seems to have been too weak. But if not, where did this demigod come from? It couldn't be that he tracked him all the way, specifically to kill him, could it? No way, no way. Forget it, let the dead rest in peace. Ember shook his head and cast these chaotic thoughts aside. Anyway, the person is dead, there's no need to dwell on where he came from. Even if he knew, it wouldn't bring him back to life. What interested Ember the most now was the secret of the volcano itself. Ember's thoughts stirred, and a piece of debris silently appeared in his hand. This was picked up by the mimic tear from the bottom of the volcano. The soil layer at the bottom of the volcano had been turned into lava by Meal's fury, and everything around it was melted by the high temperature. But this piece of debris was an exception. Everything was melted, but only it survived, Meal's fury. This was definitely not a coincidence. Ember carefully examined the piece of debris in his hand. It was entirely black, looking like a fragment of black crystal. The texture was smooth, but it didn't seem to have anything particularly strange about it. The only thing worth mentioning was perhaps its exceptional toughness. Even temperatures of several thousand degrees could not destroy it. And most importantly, it always gave Ember a strangely familiar feeling. As if he had seen it somewhere before. But the blurred memory always made him unable to recall. What exactly is this thing? A hint of deep doubt flashed in Ember's eyes, but suddenly a word appeared in his mind. Falling Star Beast. That wasn't his thought, but something the mimic tear transmitted to him. So that's how it is. As if a switch had been flipped, or a fuse had been ignited, Ember's memories surged like a tide. Information about the falling star beast gradually became clearer. No wonder it looked so familiar, it turned out to be a boss he had killed before. Falling star beast. A strange race from the celestial, said to be the pet of an unknown god. Falling star beasts usually disguise themselves as meteorites and land on a certain world, bringing destruction and devastation to that world. And they often have extremely high growth potential, constantly growing through continuous devouring and killing. From falling star beast to falling star adult, and even. Ember lowered his head and looked at the black crystal in his hand. What black crystal is this? This is clearly a fragment of the crystal armor that the falling star beast was wearing. Then it all makes sense. There was no volcano at all, that was the deep pit created when the falling star beast landed. And there seemed to be far more volcanoes, like this one. This means that perhaps a large number of falling star beasts once descended upon this world. These falling star beasts must have brought great panic and destruction, but the extraordinary of this world were clearly not pushovers either. From the current situation, this world once experienced a large-scale meteor shower. These meteors were actually disguised falling star beasts, their essence being an invasion of this world by falling star beasts. And thus, a defense war to protect the world unfolded among the extraordinary of this world. And if there were no accidents, the major churches were the main force in this defense war. Judging from the fact that the faith of the major churches is still mainstream and humanity has not been exterminated. The invasion should have ended with the victory of humanity and the gods. At least most of the falling star beasts have been eliminated, but it is not ruled out that some falling star beasts may have escaped by chance. And these volcanoes were artificially formed later by high-sequence powerhouses, with the purpose of concealing the traces of the falling star beast's existence, deliberately hiding the impact marks with towering volcanoes. But what does this have to do with the Pirates' Conference? If the falling star beasts are dead, the appearance of these pirates will not have any impact. And if the falling star beasts are not dead, there would be no volcanoes on the island. There seems to be no close connection between the two. Or is there some secret in this that I don't know? Or perhaps, these pirates are actually meant to attract those stragglers who escaped by chance. Ash. As he was thinking, Alger's shout suddenly came from outside the cabin. Ember put away the thoughts in his mind and opened the cabin door. Alger was standing in the corridor, his expression somewhat serious. I think you should come out and take a look. Alger said in a deep voice. Okay. Ember nodded and followed Alger through the corridor to the deck. The Azure Avenger had now sailed away from the small island. And in the sea area in front of them, several sailing ships were constantly cruising. Leading the way was a red-sailed warship, and a large red tree seemed to be printed on its sail. That's the flagship of Blood Admiral, the Flesh Tree. Alger took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, although it is rumored that Blood Admiral and Iceberg Admiral had a conflict, I haven't seen any trace of the Golden Dream nearby. But no matter what, I feel like he's likely coming for us. Don't worry, he might not be coming for us. Ember looked at the fleet cruising not far away and said slowly, "Go directly, and see if he stops us." "Okay." Alger nodded and, without hesitation, ordered the Azure Avenger to proceed at full speed. Lord Senor. First Mate Mavity whispered, "A ship is coming." Senor glanced at the Azure Avenger sailing towards them and said indifferently, "Ignore him. There were tens of thousands of pirates attending the pirates' conference, he couldn't possibly rob every single one. Moreover, these pirates who left early were mostly here to watch the fun, what good things could they possibly have? Even if we robbed them, it would be for nothing. What's more, they didn't come here to plunder in the first place." "Yes, Lord Senor." Mavity bowed his head respectfully, but after a while, he hesitated and said uncertainly, "Lord Jex, he seems to have been gone for a long time." Senor glanced at him coldly. "Lord Senor." Mavity trembled with fright and quickly said, "I'm just a little worried." "Worried about what?" Senor sneered. "Lord Jex is a demigod, a Sequence 3 demigod. Do you think there's anything on that island that can threaten Lord Jex?" Mavity lowered his head, cold sweat streaming down. He didn't argue, nor did he dare to. That's right. Lord Jex is a Sequence 3 demigod, even facing the four kings, they would have to temporarily avoid him. What's more, he's just going to deal with a mere fake divine messenger, how could anything go wrong? Perhaps Lord Jex is already interrogating that person right now. Lord Senor. Mavity whispered, perhaps Lord Jex has already interrogated the person behind the fake divine messenger, and he might have gone directly to track them, which is why there's been no response for so long. Senor glanced at him and nodded subtly. This analysis is reasonable. After all, with Lord Jex's strength, dealing with a rat shouldn't take this long. Wait another half hour. Senor said indifferently, if Lord Jex still hasn't returned after half an hour, we'll head back. Alger carefully steered the Azure Avenger, passing by the Blood Admiral's fleet. Seeing that the other side showed no signs of attacking, Alger couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He didn't doubt that Ember could kill everyone on the other ship by himself. After all, he had done that the first time he came to the sea. But the problem is, naval battles inevitably cause damage. Ember would be fine, and he would likely be fine too, but the ship would be in trouble. Although the Azure Avenger is a ghost ship, it's essentially just an unmanned sailboat. Its own defense is limited. If a naval battle were to truly happen, the Azure Avenger would be severely damaged even if it wasn't sunk. Although a ghost ship can slowly repair minor damage on its own, repairs require materials. And materials cost money. Furthermore, if severely damaged, a ghost ship is difficult to repair on its own. And even if it could be repaired, the cost would be so high it would make Alger's heart ache. So if a fight really broke out, he would have to board with Ash and then have the Azure Avenger hide far away. They sailed out several dozen nautical miles further, until they were completely away from the Blood Admiral's fleet. Alger finally completely relaxed. He performed the ritual again, sacrificing the medullary crystal of the elf spring to the fool. Backland, inside a coffee shop. Sorry. Klein, who was accompanying Mike on the investigation, suddenly stopped and said expressionlessly under Mike's puzzled gaze, "I'm going to the restroom." Oh. Mike immediately showed a look of understanding and winked at Klein, I get it. You don't get anything. Klein's face darkened, suppressing the urge to beat him up, turned and walked into the restroom. He walked 4 steps counterclockwise and entered the fool. The crimson star symbolizing the hanged man was contracting and expanding. Klein sighed, reached out his hand, extended his spirituality, and touched it. The medullary crystal of the elf spring. Klein played with the eggshell-like object in his hand, but couldn't help but sigh. This wasn't something he needed, it was sought after by an apothecary he met at an extraordinary gathering. Acting as a middleman now, he could earn a lot from this. But Klein felt incredibly helpless. Why does he feel like a logistics center? So why did he suddenly get the idea to do sacrifices back then? Complaints aside, Klein was not at all vague about what needed to be done. After all, the one who benefited the most from the logistics business was actually himself. If not for this logistics business, he wouldn't have been able to advance to Sequence 7 so quickly. Now I am a genuine mid-sequence expert, not terrifying, but at least I have the power to fight. Klein sat in the fool's seat and thought silently, perhaps, I can also start investigating the truth of what happened in Tingen back then. No matter what, I at least need to get revenge for myself. Speaking of which, Klein suddenly let out a long sigh, I wonder how Captain and the others are doing now. Klein suddenly felt a bit lonely. On the Fool, he is the omnipotent Mr. Fool. Respected by everyone in the Tarot Club. But in reality, who knows him? The people who cared about him are still alive, but the Klein Moretti they cared about has long since died. Klein sadly put down the medullary crystal of the elf spring and quickly returned to reality. He walked out of the restroom and saw Mike sitting by the window. "Sorry to keep you waiting." Klein walked over, and just as he spoke, he saw Mike ask with a look of concern, "Sherlock, the doctor I introduced you to last time is really skilled. Do you want to reconsider?" "No need." Klein's face instantly darkened. "You're the one with weak kidneys. Your whole family has weak kidneys. Winter County in the Northern Ruined Kingdom, Serenity Chapel, the headquarters of the Church of the Night Goddess. Leonard Mitchell, with black hair and green eyes, put on his thin black trench coat, picked up the semi-tall silk top hat hanging on the coat rack, put on his red gloves, and walked out of his room. More than a month ago, he had already successfully advanced to Sequence 7 Nightmare. And within this month, both he and Captain had endured almost all the trials of the St. Hall. Now, he is finally qualified to truly join the Red Gloves and begin performing the St. Hall's missions. Turning the corner, Leonard saw a staircase leading downwards and saw Captain Dunn Smith, wearing a black trench coat with a pair of deep gray eyes, and Klein Moretti, with a faint scholarly aura, standing there with others, waiting with smiles. As always. "What's wrong?" Dunn Smith looked beside himself with some confusion. There was nothing there. "Nothing." Leonard tilted his head slightly and whispered, "It's just that my memory is starting to get worse too. I almost forgot that he's been gone for a long time." "I see." Dunn fell silent, his eyes dimming slightly, and he said softly, "My memory isn't very good either, but I don't dare to forget how he died. He could have lived." Dunn clenched his fists, his expression even appearing somewhat distorted. Leonard just watched silently watching the usually composed Captain become incredibly distraught. He knew. Captain had always been blaming himself. If Klein hadn't given him that ring back then, perhaps everything would have been different. But if Klein really hadn't given the ring to Captain, would he still miss him this much? Perhaps he would instead resent Klein, resent him for not giving the ring to Captain. Leonard suddenly gave a self-deprecating smile. "Indeed, I really am a selfish person. Captain, where are you planning to go next?" Leonard shook his head and suddenly asked. Although Dunn was no longer his captain, but a red glove like himself. But he still couldn't change his habit. "Backland, I guess." Dunn was silent for a long time before slowly saying, "What about you?" "I'm the same as you." Leonard lowered his eyes slightly and suddenly smiled. "Coincidentally, Miss Daly and old Neil are also there. Doesn't this count as a reunion in another sense?" As he smiled, Leonard tilted his head up again, as if trying to hold something back from falling out. "This is certainly a reunion, but unfortunately, one person who should have been here is missing. The most important one is missing. Perhaps he wasn't that important before. But after his death, he undoubtedly became the most important person in their hearts, and the person they owed the most to. P.S. Lewdness is the primary productive force." Chapter 110. The Moon. Which moon? Red or blue? October 16, Tuesday. The Azure Avenger slowly sailed into the dock. This was Pritz Harbor, the largest and busiest port in Ruined Kingdom. Once they arrived at Pritz Harbor, Backland was just ahead. From there, they only needed to transfer to a steam train and could reach Backland within a few hours. As the ship slowly docked, Ember stepped off the Azure Avenger. Alger stood by the side of the ship for a long time, silently choosing to return. Backland was a good place. But unfortunately, it wasn't suitable for him at the moment. His navigator potion hadn't been fully digested yet, so he would have to continue serving as the captain of the Azure Avenger for a long time. Of course, even when the navigator potion was completely digested, he wouldn't leave the sea. Because the next sequence, Wind Blessed, could also only be digested quickly at sea. One could only say that everyone's circumstances were different. But everyone had a bright future. Winter County, inside Serenity Chapel. Leonard Mitchell put on his black trench coat, donned his red gloves, and entered the room belonging to Senior Deacon Crestai Sesama. "Congratulations, you are officially a Red Gloves. May the goddess bless you." Crestai drew a scarlet moon on his chest. He still used his high collar to cover his mouth. "Praise the goddess, it is my honor." Leonard raised his right hand and tapped 4 times clockwise. "According to your own request, I will place you in Sost's team. He is a soul man." "What about the captain?" Hearing Crestai's words, Leonard hesitated for a moment and asked. "He's the same as you." Crestai smiled, "However, he will serve as Soest's vice-captain." "Who?" Leonard let out a heartfelt sigh of relief. This was undoubtedly the best outcome. Creak. Leonard pushed open the door and left Crestai's room. In the corridor outside, Dunn, also wearing a black trench coat, was leaning against the wall waiting for him. Captain. Leonard called out, then smiled again, this time you really are the captain. Dunn had been Sequence 7 for over 10 years and should have been promoted to Sequence 6 according to normal progress. But because he had been consuming the extraordinary characteristics of his sacrificed teammates, his digestion progress was extremely slow. Yet he himself was content with this. It was Klein's death that made him realize he couldn't continue like this. Coupled with his resurrection from death in Tingen, it gave him a complete realization. A few days ago, he successfully advanced to Sequence 6 feet Soul Man. It was precisely because he had this strength that he could serve as the vice-captain of Soest's team. He only needed to gain some seniority, and he could establish his own team independently. Dunn nodded slightly, with a trace of a smile on his face, and said softly, Shigeya sent a telegram. His brother Benson resigned not long ago. When they left Tingen and chose to join the Red Gloves. Sika Trong, who had also advanced to Sequence 7, chose to stay and take over Dunn's position to continue guarding Tingen. And out of guilt and indebtedness to Klein, they had been quietly paying attention to his family. Why? Leonard's expression shifted slightly. More than half a month ago, the Unified Examination Act was passed. He resigned to focus on preparing for the exam 2 months from now. If nothing unexpected happens, they will go to Backland in a few months. That's good. Leonard opened his mouth, but in the end, he just left a dry sentence and turned away in silence. Hillston District. Zio continued her bounty hunter life, while Furs remained a slacker. Having already advanced to Trick Master, she felt she had no desires. It was just, for some reason. She felt a bit restless and decided to go for a walk. As she walked, she found herself unconsciously returning to a familiar place. Diagonally ahead of her was Yusuf Clinic, where she first worked, a rather large private clinic. However, it now belonged to Dr. Allen. After gazing for a while, Furs remembered the old lady who had led her into the extraordinary world. So she turned into the alley on the right, taking a shortcut to a nearby street. This street was lined with plane trees whose leaves were falling, a relatively quiet place. Furs remembered that the old lady lived in the house at number 39. And at this moment, an old man wearing a semi-tall black top hat and with clear blue eyes stood at the door of the house at number 39 and rang the doorbell 3 times. But undoubtedly, no one opened the door. Because no one lived there. He suddenly noticed Furs standing not far away, looking over. He quickly strode over, smiling gently and eagerly. Beautiful lady, do you live in this neighborhood? Do you know Labaro and Anliza? 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Ember took the earliest steam train to Backland and subsequently took the subway to the North District. He planned to go back to the Church of the Night first. However, he didn't go directly to St. Samuel Cathedral but chose to go to the Backland Detective Agency first. As expected, he once again saw familiar figures. Al Hansen and Borgia were playing chess as usual. Old Neil watched them play chess from the side, not interrupting, just shaking his head and sighing from time to time. Welcome back. Borgia suddenly looked up and called out. Oh. Al Hansen turned his head in surprise, and upon seeing Ember, he couldn't help but click his tongue. Tisk, you're finally back from your business trip. How was it? Business trip? Ember asked back, then suddenly realized, oh, right, business trip. It was pretty good. Al Hansen's forehead was full of black lines. Could he be any more perfunctory? Just looking at you, it's clearly not a business trip. Indeed, he knew something felt off about this matter. Someone who doesn't even come to work, and you expect him to be on a business trip for over a month. Slacking off for over a month is more like it. If you were really on a business trip, I'll eat this chessboard right now. Borgia remained silent, quietly reaching out towards the chessboard. Slap. Al Hansen slapped Borgia's hand away without even turning his head, then slowly turned around to look at Borgia and sneered, you dog, you still want to steal my chess pieces. I knew something was off when I kept forgetting the positions of the pieces while playing with you before. So you've been stealing them, huh? What do you mean stealing? Borgia retorted confidently, you let me have them. Haha. Old Neil watched their interaction happily from the side, wishing he had some melon seeds to snack on while watching the show. The captain became a deacon. Old Neil explained with a chuckle, so his memory isn't as bad as before. After a pause, Old Neil suddenly felt a bit emotional. Dunn should be close to advancing too, right? It's nothing worth mentioning. Al Hansen shook his head and said modestly, my life will probably be like this. Advancing further is neither realistic, nor do I hope for it. A Sequence 6 deacon in the Church of the Night is second only to the 13 archbishops and 9 senior deacons. But at this level, further advancement is almost as difficult as ascending to heaven. Indeed. Ember nodded in agreement. Having become a deacon and still slacking off at the headquarters, it was clear that L didn't have much ambition. But there was nothing wrong with that, at least there wasn't much danger. There wasn't much work either. Ember shook his head. It seemed that nothing major had gone wrong in the past month or so. Otherwise, Al Hansen wouldn't have such an attitude. After thinking for a moment, Ember left the detective agency and turned to walk towards the nearby Pesfield Street. There was a purely black church here, with a clock tower on each side, presenting a sense of symmetrical beauty. It was the headquarters of the Church of the Night Goddess Beckland Diocese, St. Samuel Cathedral. He stepped into the church, walked through the quiet corridor. Under the illumination of the high sunlight piercing through the stained glass, he arrived at the Great Prayer Hall. Perhaps it was the wrong time. The Great Prayer Hall was empty in the afternoon, with not a single believer. Only Archbishop Anthony stood below the altar, smiling as he watched Ember enter the prayer hall. "Welcome back, benefactor." Archbishop Anthony. Ember nodded slightly, not engaging in too much small talk, and went straight to the point. "Can you perform spirit channeling?" "A little." Archbishop Anthony nodded gently. Then, Ember flipped his palm, and a glowing object appeared in his hand. It was Jex's soul. A demigod's soul. Archbishop Anthony's eyes flickered. Her Highness Ariana only hoped that Benefactor would stay at sea for a while. But unexpectedly, the experiences of Benefactor at sea during this time seemed to have been much richer than he imagined. What does Benefactor wish to ask? Archbishop Anthony quickly hid his emotions and inquired. Ask who he is, and why he attacked, well, the person who killed him. Quote. Archbishop Anthony's expression was slightly strange. What kind of question is this? What does, "why attack the person who killed him," mean? Who are you? Which faction do you belong to? Archbishop Anthony took Jex's soul, causing it to quickly transform from a cluster of light points into a blurry, illusory figure of an old man, and asked calmly. Jex, Rose School Saint. Rose School. Archbishop Anthony's expression shifted slightly, then he asked, "Why did you attack the person who killed you?" The demigod behind him impersonated my god and delivered a false oracle. I must kill him with my own hands. Jex's soul suddenly trembled violently, and his face became somewhat distorted and ferocious. But soon, under Archbishop Anthony's comfort, his soul became peaceful and serene once more. But Archbishop Anthony's mood was somewhat startled. It is rare for a demigod to impersonate a god and deliver a false oracle, but it is not impossible. However, that is only limited to low and mid-sequence. There were indeed demigods who impersonated gods in the past, making those low and mid-sequence extraordinary believe they had heard an oracle, and mistakenly thinking they were the god's benefactor, in order to achieve some ulterior motive. But to deliver a false oracle to an extraordinary who is also a demigod, this is simply impossible. Let alone a demigod, even an angel cannot. After all, they have reached the demigod level, surely they wouldn't even recognize their own god. The only one who could deliver a false oracle is a god of the same level. But, why? Why would they establish a connection with Ember by delivering a false oracle to the Rose School? And why would Jex think it was a false oracle delivered by a demigod? He is a Sequence 3 demigod after all, surely he isn't that stupid. Archbishop Anthony was full of questions, but he did not press further, instead turning his gaze towards Ember. Benefactor, do you wish to continue asking? Continue. Ember nodded lightly, seemingly not minding Archbishop Anthony knowing the content of the oracle. What was the oracle? Find the messenger wearing 10 rings and have him collect as many of the 22 blasphemy cards as possible, especially the moon card. And the second oracle, and the mother card. The second oracle. Archbishop Anthony's expression shifted slightly. Why is it the second one? There was a clear interruption in the transmission of the oracle. It came through a few minutes later. Jex's soul's expression became ferocious again. This was clearly the greatest humiliation in his life. But under Archbishop Anthony's comfort, he regained his composure and continued, "It was also because of the interval between these two oracles that I discovered the anomaly, allowing me to pray to God in time and receive verification, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to see through it." Benefactor. Archbishop Anthony's expression became extremely serious and solemn, saying, "Bound God is an avatar of Desire Mother Tree, that is a true evil god. To be able to deliver a false oracle in the name of Desire Mother Tree, it is absolutely impossible for it to be just an ordinary demigod, it must be an evil god of at least the same level. Although the purpose of this evil god is temporarily unclear, it is highly likely that he wants to use Benefactor to achieve some unknown secret. You had best not take this so-called oracle to heart." Ember nodded silently. The Rose School's belief is in the bound god, which Ember already knew. But that the bound god is an avatar of the Desire Mother Tree, this was the first he had heard of it. But compared to the evil god who delivered the false oracle in the name of the Desire Mother Tree, Ember was more curious about another matter. Why was there an interval of a few minutes? Ember's eyes held confusion. Earlier, Blood Admiral's second mate also said there was an interruption in the transmission of the oracle. But why did the oracle have to be transmitted in 2 parts? This was clearly about the same thing. Surely it wasn't because of a bad signal. Moreover, the Desire Mother Tree, receiving an oracle transmitted by another evil god, and actually having to wait until her believer became suspicious and intentionally prayed to confirm whether there was such an oracle. If not for this, she probably wouldn't have realized until now that another evil god was impersonating her. Is this evil god a bit weak? Of course, it's also possible that the evil god who delivered the false oracle is stronger than the Desire Mother Tree. During the transmission of the oracle, he also conveniently blinded the Desire Mother Tree, making her completely unaware of this matter. But why would information be transmitted through the Rose School, and why would he be sought out? Or could it be that evil god knows him? Who do you think is impersonating the bound god to deliver the oracle? On the other side, Archbishop Anthony's questioning continued. Moon. Jex's soul gave the answer without hesitation. When I prayed to my god for a response, God delivered the true oracle. Cleanse all moon pathway extraordinary within the Rose School, so it must be a moon pathway demigod within the Rose School who delivered the false oracle. It cannot be a demigod, it can only be a god of the same level. Archbishop Anthony took a deep breath, drew a scarlet moon on his chest, and said in a deep voice, however, judging from his description, that evil god is likely, Original Moon. Original Moon might have secretly encroached upon some of the Desire Mother Tree's authority by using these moon pathway extraordinary who infiltrated the Rose School. Therefore, he was able to use this portion of authority to transmit the false oracle to Jex, and at the same time successfully blind the Desire Mother Tree's perception of this matter. After a pause, Archbishop Anthony added a reminder, Original Moon and Desire Mother Tree are suspected to be mortal enemies. After speaking, Archbishop Anthony handed Jex's soul back to Ember. There's another one. Ember took Jex's soul, and under Archbishop Anthony's strange gaze, took out another cluster of light and handed it to Archbishop Anthony. Archbishop Anthony took the cluster of light with some confusion, and a blurry phantom emerged from it. Archbishop Anthony's expression changed almost instantly. Because he recognized the owner of this soul's appearance. Major General Deputy Director of Military Intelligence 9, Kuna's Korg. Her Highness Ariana received instructions from the goddess to have Benefactor go to sea. The purpose was to have him temporarily stay away from matters related to the Black Emperor. And Benefactor had clearly already left Backland, but who would have thought that someone from the royal family would actually come knocking on his door? After a moment of hesitation, Archbishop Anthony still chose to ask first. What is your name? Kuna's Korg. Archbishop Anthony was silent for a moment, then looked at Ember. Ember reminded him, ask him where those slaves were transported. Archbishop Anthony was silent for a moment, then repeated the question. Ruins number 1, there are anti-divination and anti-prophecy arrangements there. Where is that ruin? Without needing Ember's reminder, Archbishop Anthony immediately pressed the question. In. Kuna's Korg's soul suddenly trembled violently. Even the cluster of light expanded rapidly, as if it could explode at any moment. Archbishop Anthony's expression changed slightly, and he immediately comforted Countess's soul. After all, if the other party's soul exploded in his hands, it would be hard to explain. Apologies, Benefactor. Archbishop Anthony returned the soul to Ember and apologized. His soul has a restriction placed by a powerful extraordinary. I cannot extract more valuable information from him. I'm afraid at least a sequence 2 angel would be needed to get the answer you want from him. I suggest you can ask for help from Her Highness Ariana when she comes to Backland, but before that, it's best not to try with others casually. His soul is already extremely unstable. The next interrogation is very likely to dissipate directly due to the restriction. As Archbishop Anthony spoke, a hint of doubt flashed in his eyes. Logically speaking, the first time he was asked about content that touched the restriction, his soul should have exploded directly. But Benefactor seems to have done some special processing, making his soul more stable. However, if the restriction is touched multiple times, it will ultimately still cause his soul to die from the restriction. Thank you. Ember took the soul and thanked Archbishop Anthony. In any case, at least his investigation had made new progress. Ruins No. 1. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.